Christopher Moyer was born on May 21, 1967, into a middle-class family. He valued independence and believed that education was the key to achieving it. Although he didn't have many friends, this didn't bother him much, as he spent most of his free time studying. After finishing school, he attended college, where he developed a strong interest in computers and technology. His dream was to become self-employed after earning his degree. Beyond his career goals, he also dreamed of starting a family. By 2010, Christopher was 44 years old and had realized his aspirations. He was self-employed, working as his own boss, and happily married. He lived in a spacious house in Pennsylvania with his wife and son. He worked as a freelance computer specialist, assembling custom computers for clients from his home. His wife, Irina Moyer, was skilled in electronics and assisted him with his work. She was born on August 12, 1971, which made her 39 years old in 2010. Irina was originally from Ukraine and had moved to the United States in search of a better life. She met Christopher in April 2002 during a challenging time in his life. He was going through a difficult divorce from his first wife, with whom he had no children. This experience left Christopher longing for a large, loving family. Irina also shares this dream and hopes to build a new life in the United States. Their relationship developed quickly, and later that same year, they decided to get married. They began planning for their future, which included moving out of Christopher's bachelor home to a place more suitable for a family. Before they could find a new home, Irina discovered she was pregnant. In 2003, they purchased a large, cozy house in a quiet suburb of Orington. The area was peaceful, scenic, and much safer than the bustling city where Christopher had previously lived. Although the local residents formed a close-knit community, the Moyers were more reserved, choosing to keep to themselves. Over the years, neighbors described them as withdrawn and rarely seen in the neighborhood. While they didn't socialize or attend local gatherings, they weren't entirely disconnected. For example, Christopher once arranged for shared use of a snowblower with his neighbors. However, in most cases, the family preferred solving problems independently. On September 25, 2003, Irina gave birth to their first and only child, Dylan Moyer. By 2010, Dylan was 7 years old and thriving in school. Having successfully completed the first grade, he was a bright, intelligent child, and his parents were incredibly proud of him. Teachers, both from his kindergarten and primary school, regularly praised Dylan for his abilities. Much of his success stemmed from the active involvement of both his parents in his education. Being highly educated themselves, Christopher and Irina prioritized their son's learning and supported him every step of the way. While they avoided participating in the neighborhood's social life, they always attended school meetings together, demonstrating their dedication to helping Dylan succeed in both academics and life. Christopher was known as a calm, grounded individual, and his wife, Irina, shared many of his qualities. Both were thoughtful and quiet, preferring action over conversation. Their closest neighbor, Rose Radziul, knew them better than anyone else in the area. Although they were on friendly terms, Rose described Christopher and Irina as reserved, meek, and silent. Their interactions with her rarely extended beyond simple greetings and polite exchanges. Notably, Rose noticed that Christopher had a tendency to be controlling and domineering towards Irina. She noticed that Irina seemed to become more withdrawn when she was with Christopher, often avoiding communication so as not to upset him. Their son, Dylan, however, was different. Teachers regarded him as an exceptionally bright and curious boy. By kindergarten, he had a vocabulary beyond his years and often impressed or puzzled adults with his questions. Dylan's primary school teacher was particularly fond of him, recognizing his great potential early on. Instead of playing typical games for children his age, Dylan showed an interest in scientific literature, often reading during his free time. Like his parents, he was not highly social, but he maintained good relationships with his peers. Irina was described as a loving and devoted mother who prioritized her son's well-being and development. Despite her shy and unsociable personality, Christopher, similarly, was regarded as a caring father, deeply invested in Dylan's well-being. According to relatives, the family had created a warm and nurturing home environment, rooted in love for each other and their child. A few months before the tragedy, the family had even taken a trip to Disneyland, making the events of June 17, 2011, all the more shocking. At 9:40 p.m. on that fateful Friday, 44-year-old Christopher called emergency services. He calmly confessed to killing his wife and son with a baseball bat, stating that both were dead and refusing to offer any first aid. His cold and detached tone during the call was unsettling, as if he were discussing something mundane. He gave a detailed account of the crime, describing how he had killed Irina by beating her to death before attacking their son Dylan. He even supplied his personal information and the family's home address, thanked the dispatcher, and hung up. Emergency responders rushed to the Moyer family home, where they encountered a chilling scene. When no one answered the door, authorities initially suspected Christopher had barricaded himself inside and might be armed. A note taped outside listed the names and contact details of relatives, suggesting that Christopher had prepared for what was to come. Neighbors began to gather, watching the tense situation unfold. The police believed Christopher might resist arrest, but then someone noticed one of the family's cars was missing. This raised the possibility that Christopher had fled. By 2 a.m., officers entered the home through an open garage door. They proceeded cautiously, weapons drawn, but found no one alive inside. Instead, they were met with a gruesome scene. On the second floor, they discovered two bodies, 7-year-old Dylan and 39-year-old Irina. Both had suffered severe head trauma from a blunt object, their skulls brutally disfigured. Irina's body was found in the bathroom adjacent to the main bedroom. Bloodstains and drag marks suggested that her body had been moved there after the attack. A towel was also placed over her face, a gruesome detail that added to the haunting scene. Christopher, however, was nowhere to be found. Dylan's room was nearby. He was found in his bedroom with injuries similar to those of Irina. A bloody baseball bat, believed to be the murder weapon, was lying next to his body. The bat was sent to a lab for analysis, as the caller on the emergency line had predicted. The police activity quickly attracted the attention of the neighbors, especially Rose, who was close to the family. When Rose goes to find out what is going on, she is horrified by the brutal attack on the Moyer family, and is even more shocked when she hears Christopher confess over the phone that he killed his own family. The police immediately questioned Rose, hoping she might have heard or seen something since she was at home during the time of the murders. However, Rose stated that she hadn't heard any screams or disturbances, only the sound of a car engine leaving the Moyer residence, which she assumed was Christopher fleeing the scene. She also noted that she hadn't noticed anything unusual or any warning signs of such a violent event. Rose shared detailed information about the family, with the police being particularly interested in Christopher, who was missing. They needed to determine the direction he might have gone in and whether he had taken a weapon with him, as one neighbor had suggested. Christopher had reportedly told the emergency dispatcher that he planned to wait for the police to arrive. Yet, for reasons unknown, he was gone by the time officers reached the crime scene. Rose described Christopher as calm and introverted, adding that she couldn't imagine him committing such an atrocity. She noted that, although he wasn't very affectionate towards his wife, they seemed happy in public, and she had never seen him argue with his wife or scold his son. Forensic experts and detectives thoroughly combed the crime scene, working to piece together what had transpired. No signs of a break-in were discovered, and all the available evidence pointed to Christopher's responsibility for the attack. Fearing that his mental state had deteriorated and that he might harm someone else, authorities launched an urgent manhunt. Despite this, Christopher's actions didn't fit the profile of a typical serial killer or maniac. 2 hours after police arrived at the house, they were still searching intensively for Christopher. They tried reaching him on his mobile phone, but he didn't respond to any calls. During the investigation, security footage from a nearby camera captured Christopher's car, narrowing down the potential routes he could have taken. Road services and patrol units were alerted and stationed at strategic points in an effort to intercept him. Yet Christopher seemed to have vanished. At 12:56 a.m., a witness from a neighboring town called Hadborough rang the police. The caller, a train engineer, reported finding a body on the railway tracks. Tragically, the man on the tracks matched Christopher's description. According to the engineer, the train was unable to stop in time to avoid hitting the man. Authorities arrived at the scene and found a body later identified as Christopher through documents found in his possession. His pocket contained $300 in cash and car keys. A dark Toyota Camry, registered to Christopher, was located near the railroad crossing. The police concluded that Christopher had deliberately ended his life shortly after the murders. He appeared to have been familiar with the train's schedule and intentionally positioned himself on the tracks to coincide with the arrival of an oncoming train. As a result, the entire Moyer family died, leaving many unanswered questions about this horrific incident. Irina's parents, along with her brother and sister-in-law, were in a neighboring town when the news broke. The police contacted them to inform them of the deaths of Irina, Dylan, and Christopher. During questioning, the family revealed that the Moyers had planned to visit them that weekend. According to their plans, Christopher, Irina, and Dylan were supposed to drive over on Saturday night. After the visit, Dylan was meant to stay with his grandparents for a few days, while his parents spent time alone together, with the grandparents later returning Dylan home. The tragic events, however, unfolded just days before this planned visit. Shortly before the tragic events, Irina's parents tried to call her, but their calls went unanswered. They were not overly concerned, assuming the family had gone to bed early to prepare for their long journey. Relatives of theirs stated that they had spoken with the Moyers on Friday morning, when both Irina and Christopher seemed cheerful and did not mention any issues. They were busy making final preparations for their trip. Neither Irina nor Christopher had a history of mental health problems, which made the tragic events even more shocking. Christopher's parents were also informed of the tragedy. His father reported speaking with him on the same day and noted nothing unusual or alarming. Christopher had mentioned extending a contract with a major client, which made him optimistic about his upcoming weekend plans and improving his financial situation. Their family had been dealing with financial struggles recently due to the instability of freelance work. Christopher had expressed concerns about potentially losing their home, but the issue appeared to have been resolved. It seemed he was simply worried that such financial difficulties could return. When friends and family were questioned, none could provide a motive for the tragedy. Christopher, described as a loving husband and father, seemed incapable of such violence. What could have driven him to kill his entire family and take his own life? Their family was private, rarely sharing details of their personal lives. The medical examiner's office conducted autopsies on Irina and Dylan. Both were found to have died from multiple blunt force head injuries inflicted with extreme force and determination. However, these findings provided no insight into why Christopher, a man with no history of depression or violent tendencies, would commit such a horrific act. Family members described Irina as loyal to her husband, leading a quiet life with minimal social interactions beyond her neighbors and her child's teachers. Their relationship was considered healthy and loving. Christopher was seen as a hard-working man who provided for his family and never displayed depressive behaviors or violent tendency. Adding to the mystery, Christopher left no suicide note to shed light on what led to this devastating act. Key documents found in the house revealed crucial details. Investigators discovered that the family was at risk of losing their $450,000 home. Christopher had received a foreclosure notice just days before the tragedy, and they lacked the funds to resolve their financial troubles. This crushing reality may have driven Christopher to despair. It is believed that he had planned to harm himself, but in his state of anguish and loss of reason, he could not bear to leave his wife and children to face poverty and hardship. He may have convinced himself that killing his family was a way to shield them from future suffering. Despite this theory, the exact motive remains uncertain. Detectives carefully examined all evidence and consulted psychiatric experts on such behavior. Typically, such actions are linked to underlying mental health problems. However, Christopher had no diagnosed mental health illnesses and exhibited no signs of significant struggles beforehand. Relatives shared that Christopher had been deeply stressed by financial issues. Their family had previously faced the threat of losing their home in 2006, but succeeded in overcoming the challenge. The family lived modestly, but this time, the situation appeared dire and irreparable. There was no evidence to suggest that Christopher had been struggling with severe mental health issues or that he had planned the tragedy long in advance. Experts instead believe the decision may have been impulsive, driven by the overwhelming tension that Christopher had quietly been battling on his own. Christopher's father was aware that his son would never seek help from a psychiatrist, no matter how severe the situation became. There had been a suspicion that Christopher might have used illegal substances, but this was proven false. Toxicological tests confirmed that his blood was clean. However, this detail provided another clue. Christopher was not taking any prescribed medication, indicating that he had avoided seeking medical help for his anxiety or other possible issues. The forensic investigation continued, uncovering troubling evidence. The blood found on a baseball bat near Dylan's body was identified as belonging to both Dylan and Irina. Fingerprints on the other end of the stick showed it was Christopher's. Besides, footprints and additional evidence from the family home allowed investigators to piece together the tragic sequence of events. The Friday morning when the tragedy unfolded had seemed normal, but Christopher had likely already made his decision. A trip was planned for the following day, and his wife and son went to bed early that evening. Christopher, however, stayed awake, unable to sleep. At some point, he retrieved a baseball bat from the garage and waited for his family to fall into a deep sleep. He did not want to make noise or raise suspicion. Christopher's actions suggested that he wanted to carry out his plans swiftly, though calling it humane would be a stretch. He first entered the bedroom he shared with his wife and attacked her suddenly. The first blow to her head caused fatal injuries, leaving her unable to scream or resist. Christopher proceeded to strike her multiple times, breaking her skull. He likely believed that ensuring her death quickly was necessary. Irina succumbed to internal bleeding within minutes, and forensic evidence showed that she had no defensive wounds, indicating she had been caught completely off guard. Next, Christopher turned to his son, Dylan, who was asleep in his room. He killed him in the same manner, with the boy unaware of what was happening. Afterward, Christopher dragged his wife's body to the bathroom adjacent to their bedroom, leaving a blood trail behind. The reason for this act remains unknown. Additionally, he covered her face with a towel, a gesture often associated with remorseful killers who cannot bear to look at the consequences of their actions. After the murders, Christopher did not immediately call emergency services. Instead, he wrote a note listing the contact information of family members, presumably to assist authorities in reaching them. He also sent a text message to his father, apologizing. At the time, his father had no idea what had occurred and did not understand the gravity of the message. The violent events were entirely unexpected and shocking, even to those closest to Christopher. After bidding farewell to his family and leaving behind clues, Christopher called 911 to confess his actions. However, he did not wait for the police to arrive. He needed to act quickly to position himself at a reachable section of the train tracks before it was too late. This urgency may explain why he left no explanation for his actions in his note. He also chose not to leave a will, possibly because the family possessed very few valuables. Only 2 cars remained. Their most valuable property had already been lost, and they had no savings. A key document found in the house provided critical insight into the double murder. It revealed that the family had been struggling with financial problems for an extended period. Christopher's freelance work was insufficient to support a family of 3. Years earlier, he had faced the risk of losing their home for the first time. Thankfully, they managed to make the necessary payments in 2006 and kept their house. However, their financial situation deteriorated further in 2010. By September of that year, debts were mounting once again. Family members and neighbors suspected that the financial troubles were linked to money and real estate. Unfortunately, Christopher had kept his struggles private and did not ask for help, so no one realized how severe their situation had become, not even his relatives. Psychiatric experts concluded that Christopher decided to kill his family when he realized they were unable to escape their financial difficulties. In his distorted reasoning, he believed that taking their lives was the only way to spare them from a life of poverty. His disturbed state of mind led him to view this act as a twisted form of mercy. After the investigation was concluded, the case was closed. Irina and Dylan Moyer were buried together in Pennsylvania, near a city nearby. There is less information available about Christopher's funeral, but it is known that he was buried separately, far from his wife and child. Irina's family insisted on this, as they believed it was unfair to bury the murderer with Irina and Dylan. Tinia Stewart was born on July 10, 1987. Her childhood was not very peaceful. Her parents divorced when she was very young, and at just 6 years old, she faced her first major tragedy, the death of her father from a brain aneurysm. Following the divorce, her mother, Gail, remarried. Her stepfather was caring, and soon she became an older sister. Despite this difficult beginning, Tinia grew up in a loving family that valued and supported one another. The family lived in Borders Village, Texas. As a child, she was organized, responsible, and did well in school. Like many teenagers, she struggled with self-doubt and insecurities, which led to conflicts with her stepfather. However, as she matured, she worked to overcome these challenges and turned her weaknesses into strengths. Tinia was ambitious and dreamed of achieving something extraordinary. In high school, despite not enjoying sports, she made her mark as the basketball team's manager, helping lead the players outside of the game. Her talent for singing also shone through as she performed the national anthem at school games. Drawn to music, she even created a music group with friends at school. Balancing academics, extracurricular activities, and part-time work, Tinia was highly driven. According to the school director, she was one of the most ambitious students, taking steps every day to get closer to her dreams. Tinia's ultimate goal was to attend Texas A&M University and become a construction engineer. Thanks to her excellent performance in high school, she earned scholarships totaling $40,000. Determination and effort helped her achieve many significant accomplishments. But it was also these very qualities that made the events that followed even more heartbreaking. Tinia's first serious relationship was with Curtis, a handsome and popular middle school student. He adored her, treating her like the most important person in the world. They were inseparable, attending school events and even their graduation night together. Many admired their relationship and wished to be in Tinia's shoes. However, as with many young love stories, their relationship was unpredictable. They experienced ups and downs, but remained close. Curtis cared deeply for Tinia and always wanted the best for her. Everything changed during Tinia's third year of college. While working part-time at a pizzeria, she met Timothy Wayne Shepard, a delivery driver. There was an instant connection between them. She ended her on-again, off-again relationship with Curtis and started dating Timothy. This time, the relationship felt more serious. However, there was a secret that Tinia kept hidden for a long time. Timothy was 8 years older than her. He was 24, while she was only 16 when they started dating. Fearing her parents' disapproval, she didn't tell her parents about their age difference. Unaware of this, Tinia's family welcomed Timothy with open arms. Her mother, stepfather, and sister grew to love him and thought the relationship might lead to marriage. Timothy became a regular presence at family gatherings and even bonded with Tinia's younger sister. Eventually, they began living together. When Tinia graduated from high school in 2006 and enrolled at Texas A&M University, she and Timothy decided to maintain a long-distance relationship. However, it didn't last. Not long after Tinia left, Timothy's ex-girlfriend re-entered his life, and he rekindled his relationship with her. Tinia was devastated by this betrayal, but she refused to let it hold her back. She remained focused on her ambitions and embraced the independence and opportunities that college life brought. At Texas A&M, she found herself surrounded by new friends, experiences, and possibilities. Meanwhile, Timothy's brief reconciliation with his ex-girlfriend was short-lived. He quickly realized it was a mistake and found himself missing Tinia, desperate to win her back. He left everything behind and rushed to her college, where she was surprised by his unexpected arrival. They talked and discovered they still had feelings for each other. They decided to attempt a long-distance relationship once again. However, over time, Tinia began to grow and change emotionally. She no longer wanted to hold on to the past, and during this period, she met Mark, a classmate her own age. Mark shared her thoughts and interests, and although a part of her heart still belonged to Timothy, she came to realize their romance was over. About 2 years later, Tinia made a definitive decision. She decided to move on and began spending time with Mark. Their relationship started slowly, with friendship and a bit of flirting, as they enjoyed each other's company. During this time, Tinia remained in touch with Timothy, hoping to maintain a friendship with him. In her mind, love and friendship could coexist. By March 2007, Tinia had fully adjusted to student life. She was excited about what lay ahead and was genuinely happy. She eagerly counted the days until the spring holidays, anticipating reuniting with her friends from her hometown and attending a Beyoncé concert scheduled for March 15th in Houston. After the concert, Tinia planned to visit South Padre Island before returning to campus. On the evening of March 14th, she and her friends prepared for the next day's event. The group of former classmates styled each other's hair, laughed until they cried, and reminisced about their school days. Tinia planned to spend the night at her friend Lois's apartment. That evening, she called her mother to ask permission to borrow the car for the concert, and her mother happily agreed, not knowing this would be their last conversation. Tragically, she never made it to the concert. She went missing from Lois's apartment that night and stopped answering her phone. Lois grew alarmed, knowing Tinia would never miss a Beyoncé concert. She had planned everything meticulously. When Tinia didn't show up the next morning, March 15th, her friends panicked. Lois contacted Gail, Tinia's mother, who had not heard from her daughter since the evening of March 14th. The family was immediately concerned, as Tinia would never disappear without reason or leave them worried. Gail called Tinia's friends and classmates, but no one had any information about her whereabouts. In a desperate attempt to learn more, Gail called Timothy, hoping he might know something. He admitted to speaking to Tinia on the evening of Wednesday, March 14th, but had not seen her since. As it turned out, Wednesday was the night before the concert, meaning Timothy could have been the last person to have seen her. Unable to wait any longer, Gail decided to start her own investigation. She personally confronted Timothy, seeking answers. Although the family had liked Timothy when he and Tinia were dating, Gail approached him with caution, sensing something she couldn't explain, an instinctive unease that grew stronger now that Tinia was missing. Timothy explained that he had met with Tinia on the night of March 14th, after she spent the evening with her friends at Lois's apartment. He picked her up, and they went to his place. However, around 3 a.m., Tinia received a phone call. Timothy, consumed by jealousy, assumed it was Mark, her new boyfriend, and insisted on knowing why he was calling so late. She refused to discuss her relationship with Mark and left Timothy's apartment. Between 4 and 5 she walked away alone, on foot. On March 19th, after days of no contact, Gail reported her daughter's disappearance to law enforcement. Gail provided the authorities with a detailed description of Tinia and all the known events leading to her disappearance. Tinia, a 19-year-old, standing 156 centimeters tall and weighing 54 kilograms, had black hair, brown eyes, and distinctive tattoos on her right thigh and back. The last person to see her, Lois, reported that she was wearing a white shirt and rainbow-colored pajamas at the time. Despite her mother, Gail's, concerns, the police dismissed the situation, suggesting that, as an adult on spring break, she might have simply left without giving notice. They advised Gail to wait and check back after the weekend. However, Gail knew her daughter wouldn't just disappear without telling anyone. Tinia had plans to attend a concert and return to her college classes. If she were going somewhere, she would have informed her family. Days passed without any updates, leaving the family to take action on their own. They distributed flyers, searched nearby areas, contacted hospitals and morgues, and spoke with Tinia's friends and classmates, desperately hoping for any clue about her whereabouts. When classes resumed, Tinia was still missing, raising concerns among her professors, who also tried to reach her. With each passing day, the family became more worried. Frustrated by the lack of action from authorities, the family organized a community meeting at the local Lutheran church, hoping to draw attention to Tinia's disappearance. This effort finally gained traction when an assistant in the sheriff's office working in the missing persons department took an interest in the case. The investigation revealed Tinia was last seen at the apartment of Timothy. When police visited the apartment building, no one answered the door. The apartment manager informed officers that his unit had been affected by a fire 2 days earlier. A neighbor also reported hearing gunshots in the forest near the apartment complex, prompting the police to bring in a canine unit to search the area. The search dogs quickly caught the scent of decay just dozens of meters from the complex, but it turned out to be the remains of a dead animal. Investigators then focused on the fire at Timothy's apartment. Neighbors had been alarmed by thick black smoke coming from the balcony of Unit 224, which lasted for hours. Firefighters were called to the scene, but Timothy refused to let them in, claiming he was simply grilling meat on several grills on his balcony and that there was no danger. By the time the firefighters arrived, the smoke had disappeared and there was no visible fire. The firefighters eventually convinced Timothy to allow them to inspect the apartment, where they discovered melted ice and pieces of meat in the bathroom. The type of meat was unclear. Since no crime had been committed, grilling meat in one's home isn't illegal. The firefighters left. Shortly afterward, a sheriff's assistant summoned Timothy to the police station for questioning. Calmly, he repeated the same story he had secretly told Gail earlier. Tinia had left his apartment after an argument sparked by a late-night call from Mark. According to him, she slammed the door and left on foot without saying anything further. With no evidence against him, he was released. Tinia's family continued to pray for her safe return, but no answers ever came. They were left devastated, feeling abandoned by the authorities and believing no one truly cared about their daughter and sister. The community expressed outrage at the authorities' lack of decisive action. Many believed the media prioritized cases involving missing white girls, while largely ignoring those involving black individuals. Tinia's sister and cousin sought help from public activist Krenle, a well-known figure in the black community and advocate for justice system reform. Krenle, known for his mistrust of law enforcement, became a prominent voice for families overlooked by the authorities. He promised to uncover the truth, and after his involvement, police began to take the case more seriously. Investigators discovered that Tinia had been dating a young man named Mark around the time of her disappearance and decided to question him. Initially, Mark avoided police calls, but later contacted them himself. During questioning, Mark revealed that he had traveled to South Padre Island on March 17th. The detectives found it suspicious that he left town after Tinia went missing, but he explained that he tried to reach her before leaving and only learned about her disappearance after he arrived in South Padre. Attention then shifted to Tinia's ex-boyfriend, Timothy, who was reportedly the last person to see her alive. Detectives began investigating Timothy thoroughly, looking into his background and speaking with his neighbors. Timothy came from a well-regarded family. His mother worked as a pharmacist, and his stepfather, who raised him after his biological father passed away when he was 2 months old, was a deacon at the Missionary Baptist Church. His mother participated in the church choir, and his younger sister was studying law at the University of Houston. His family was well respected in their community. Timothy himself was a father to a 4-year-old daughter, for whom he had full custody. Neighboring residents described him as quiet, polite, and devoted to his daughter. Though he seemed to live a relatively normal life, investigators uncovered a prior legal issue involving possession of unauthorized substances. This incident occurred well before Tinia's disappearance. Armed with Timothy's prior written consent, police searched his apartment for clues. As soon as detectives entered Timothy's apartment, they noticed 2 alarming details. First, the smell, an odd mixture of bleach, ammonia, and another unidentifiable odor. Second, the signs of hurried renovations. The kitchen cabinets, walls, door frames, and even the inner part of the tub had been hastily painted white. Additionally, bleach stains were visible on the carpet. There was a dirty mop nearby, and a package of latex gloves was found. The sink, bathroom, and drain had been meticulously cleaned. This raised immediate suspicion of an attempted cover-up. Despite the cleanup efforts, investigators found blood traces in the bathroom. Using luminol, they confirmed the worst: the entire bathroom lit up blue, revealing blood splatters across the walls, floor, shower, toilet, and tank. The discovery prompted forensic experts to collect DNA evidence and other potential clues. While waiting for the results, detectives returned to the area to conduct further interviews and gather additional details. It wasn't long before an alarming report surfaced. According to 911 calls, residents of Timothy's apartment complex had reported seeing flames 3 days before Tinia's mother, Gail, officially filed the missing persons report. One neighbor described noticing the strong smell of burning rubber and fearing for her home due to the intensity of the fire. Another neighbor, who regularly played video games with Timothy, recalled that he often invited friends over to grill meat. However, during this particular barbecue, he did not extend any invitations. Meanwhile, other residents reported hearing banging noises, running water, and the continuous hum of a garbage disposal coming from Timothy's unit, apartment 224. Piece by piece, a troubling picture began to form, and Timothy quickly became the prime suspect. At that time, Krenle spoke to Tinia and Timothy's families and learned a lot about their relationship. Initially, their bond was strong, filled with love and plans for the future. However, it didn't take long for the relationship to become unstable. There were constant arguments and problems. After Tinia left for college, she confided to her family that she feared Timothy. His controlling nature, driven by jealousy, often crossed boundaries. Timothy's behavior became obsessive. He called Tinia incessantly, demanding to know her whereabouts and who she spent time with. Even after their breakup, he repeatedly called her dorm neighbors to gather information about her. When they refused, he left them angry messages. Tinia did not share the full extent of her troubles with her family, as she didn't want to alarm them. However, a close friend admitted that Timothy had once grabbed Tinia by the neck, threatening to strangle and kill her if she ever left him. On another occasion, when Tinia declined a ring he gave her on Valentine's Day, Timothy jokingly said he would one day kill her, grill her body, and feed it to dogs. This all occurred about 1.5 years earlier. Eventually, things seemed to calm down, and Timothy stopped contacting her until February 2007. A month before the spring break, he called again. Tinia was apprehensive, worried he wouldn't leave her in peace. She even considered not returning to her city. Despite her fears, she longed to see her family and friends. To avoid any conflict, she calmly talked to Timothy and agreed to meet him before leaving. Though she still had feelings for him, she knew their relationship had no future. Krenle sought Timothy's side of the story, arranging a meeting at Timothy's apartment. Krenle found him nervous, with trembling hands, darting eyes, and visible despair. Inside the apartment, Krenle noticed luminol traces in the bathroom, left by forensic investigators. When Timothy was asked about Tinia's fate, he hung his head and admitted that she was no longer alive. He admitted he was terrified of death and did not want to die himself. Krenle persuaded Timothy to help bring closure to Tinia's family. He led Krenle to a dumpster behind an apartment building about 5 kilometers from his home. His behavior became erratic, his breathing grew heavy, and his hands started twitching. He refused to even glance at the dumpster. However, when the container's lid was opened, it was empty, as the trash had already been transported to a landfill. Despite exhaustive searches, Tinia's remains were never recovered. Timothy was arrested and charged with her murder. Tinia's family was devastated once more. They now knew that Tinia was gone, but they didn't even have a chance to give her a proper goodbye or burial. While in custody, Timothy initially exercised his right to a lawyer, but later changed his mind. Alone in the interrogation room, he made a decision that shocked everyone. He confessed to the crime. According to Timothy, the night Tinia disappeared, the two argued over her new boyfriend, Mark. Tinia was frustrated with Timothy interfering in her life again. In the heat of the argument, she allegedly grabbed a knife from the table and swung at him, leaving a scratch on his hand. Timothy claimed he felt threatened at first, but soon became enraged. He snapped, grabbing her neck with his right hand while trying to take the knife with his left. He strangled her until she dropped the knife and collapsed onto the floor. Panicked and convinced no one would believe him, Timothy chose not to call 911. Instead, he placed Tinia's body into a large plastic storage container and disposed of it in a dumpster, a location he later pointed out to Krenle. By the time authorities launched their investigation, the garbage from the dumpster had already been transported to a landfill. Timothy then attempted to end his life by tying a belt around his neck and tying it to a doorknob. However, the attempt was unsuccessful. Meanwhile, the police deliberated on how to proceed in their search for Tinia's body. The landfill spanned an enormous area, receiving several dozen tons of garbage daily. The search could take months and incur high costs, and detectives weren't even certain they would recover her remains. However, the deeper horror lay in what police uncovered next. Details Timothy had initially failed to reveal. Timothy likely would never have fully confessed if investigators hadn't dug further. Suspicious that he was withholding information, the police returned to his apartment and conducted a more thorough search of the balcony. What they discovered during this search was chilling. Experts examined the bathroom and kitchen drains, the gaps on the balcony, and the trash can. They uncovered burnt hair, small charred bone fragments, shards of teeth, and pieces of burnt skin. These items were analyzed for DNA, and the results confirmed the worst. After the murder, Timothy had placed Tinia's body in the bathroom, disposed of it, and attempted to eliminate all traces. He burned some remains on his balcony grills and disposed of the ashes in the trash. Other body parts were destroyed using a kitchen waste shredder. He scattered additional fragments in various garbage containers. Over the course of 2 to 3 days, Timothy worked to dispose of Tinia's body, believing that burning her remains would make identification impossible. During this time, firefighters inspecting his apartment later found pieces of what appeared to be meat in a bathtub filled with ice. These turned out to be parts of Tinia's body. At the time, the firefighters had no idea they had stumbled upon human remains. DNA analysis later confirmed that the body fragments belonged to 19-year-old Tinia Stewart. Timothy Shepard was then arrested and held on $250,000 bail. After discovering what had happened to her daughter, Gail, Tinia's mother, demanded that Timothy receive the harshest punishment possible. The prosecutor was equally determined to secure a conviction, but the case nearly fell apart because of Timothy's defense attorney, Chip Lewis. Chip, a well-known lawyer with a history of high-profile cases, had once successfully argued in a previous case that body disposal does not necessarily indicate murder. Now defending Timothy, Chip sought to challenge every piece of evidence. His main argument was that Timothy's confession had been coerced and obtained under duress, claiming detectives had violated legal protocol. Had Chip succeeded, the evidence found in the apartment would have been inadmissible in court, significantly weakening the prosecution's case. Fortunately, the prosecutor was able to persuade the judge to deny the defense's request, and the trial moved forward. The trial of 28-year-old Timothy Wayne Shepard began on September 29, 2008. The prosecutor presented the horrifying details of the crime to those attending the hearings, forcing Tinia's family to endure the pain of imagining the cruel acts inflicted upon their loved one. Throughout the trial, the defense team argued that Timothy had strangled Tinia in self-defense and tried to downplay the brutal nature of what followed. For example, regarding a tooth fragment found in Timothy's apartment, the defense ludicrously claimed that Tinia could have simply dropped it down the sink before her death. In response, the prosecutor countered with evidence that Timothy had used pliers to extract Tinia's teeth to prevent identification through dental records. This claim was confirmed by forensic experts brought in as witnesses. The grim details painted a horrifying picture of the events and left little doubt about Timothy's actions. The public activist, Krenle, also addressed the crowd, pledging to seek justice for Tinia's family. He kept his promise by providing testimony about everything he witnessed. After 4 days of deliberations, the jury found Timothy guilty of murdering his ex-girlfriend, Tinia. Tinia's family and friends were overcome with emotion, while Timothy sat cold and indifferent, showing no remorse. When it came time for the verdict, he decided to make a statement in an attempt to gain sympathy from the court. Ignoring his lawyer's advice, he spoke, believing he could convince everyone that he did not deserve a harsh punishment. He expressed a desire to return to his normal life instead of spending the best years of his life in prison. However, his speech failed to evoke any pity. Ultimately, Timothy Wayne Shepard was sentenced to 99 years in prison and a $10,000 fine, the maximum penalty. While justice seemed to prevail, Tinia's mother, Gail, blamed herself for not recognizing the danger posed by Timothy. She regretted allowing him into her home and into her daughter's life, unaware of what he was truly capable of. After losing her daughter, Gail became determined to prevent other women from suffering at the hands of abusive ex-partners. She now shares Tinia's story and advocates for healthy relationships, urging parents to be involved in their children's lives. Gail firmly believes that looking out for the well-being of one's child is not interference, but a responsibility every parent must uphold. Molly Nicole Watson was born on December 15, 1982, in Moberly, Missouri. Her parents, Timothy and Sandy, and her brother Tim, have always created a warm and supportive home. Diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, Molly embraced her differences and forged ahead with resilience and determination. Those who have come into contact with her often describe her as energetic, creative, and extremely passionate. Molly earned a master's degree in psychology and dedicated her career to education. She lived in a colorful and creative world filled with Harry Potter books, comic novels, Disney characters, and intricate cosplay costumes. Her creativity even extended to designing her own nail polish line. Her home was her sanctuary, packed with books, fantasy, and the comforting presence of her 5 cats. She was a unique mix of strength and gentleness, calm yet unapologetically herself. In her mid-20s, Molly married, but the relationship ended in divorce after 2 years. Not long after, she discovered she was pregnant. Before her son was born, Molly began a new and unexpected chapter, a relationship with Amber Brady, a childhood acquaintance. Though not close when they were younger, reconnecting years later brought them together. Both women were fresh from failed marriages, and what began as a surprise blossomed into a meaningful and fulfilling partnership. When Molly gave birth to her son, Declan, who was diagnosed with cerebral palsy, Amber was by her side. Together, they supported each other through life's challenges. After her maternity leave, Molly began working at the Moberly Area Correctional Center, where she met James Addy, a married Navy veteran and corrections officer 16 years her senior. Despite their differences, Molly and James grew close. James confided in Molly, claiming that his marriage to his wife Melanie was ending. Believing him, Molly allowed their friendship to develop into a secret affair. They discreetly met in motels, hiding their relationship, Molly from Amber and James from his wife. The truth unraveled when Amber spotted Molly with James at a gas station. Growing suspicious, Amber eventually followed Molly to a motel and confronted her. That confrontation marked the end of Molly and Amber's relationship. Now free from the constraints of her past, Molly is openly dating James and is madly in love with him. However, her friends noticed something unusual. Molly paid all the bills, while James was cold, distant, and unwilling to commit fully. Despite this, Molly believed he was the one. In October 2017, James told Molly that his divorce had been finalized, filled with happiness and hope. Molly took the initiative and proposed. After James agreed, she threw herself into planning the wedding with joy and excitement. She envisioned a Disney-inspired celebration based on Beauty and the Beast, with burgundy and gold as her chosen colors. Molly hired a wedding planner, makeup artist, hairstylist, and even purchased 2 wedding dresses because she couldn't decide between them. She documented her journey on a new YouTube channel, radiating happiness as she shared her plans. Her eyes sparkled in her videos as she spoke with enthusiasm and sang softly in her princess-like voice. To Molly, the wedding felt like a real-life fairy tale. As the big day approached, however, life took a darker turn. At the end of 2017, James's ex-wife Melanie was involved in a severe car accident that left her on life support. James had to step in to care for their children, and Molly stood by him during this difficult time. They considered postponing their wedding, but ultimately decided to proceed with their plans. In April 2018, just days before their wedding, Melanie unexpectedly passed away. Despite the heartbreak, Molly pressed on, handling the final wedding arrangements alone, while James focused on planning Melanie's funeral. The situation was deeply tragic, but Molly remained determined to prepare for what she thought would be the happiest day of her life. Amid the grief, a surprising detail came to light. Melanie wasn't James's first or even second wife. She was his fourth. Before meeting Molly, James had been married multiple times. When they went to the courthouse to apply for their marriage license, the process turned uncomfortable. James appeared anxious, avoided direct answers about his marital history, and seemed reluctant to share details. Molly either didn't notice or chose to ignore these red flags. Her love for James outweighed any doubts or concerns. However, Molly never made it to the altar. On the night of April 27, 2018, just 2 days before the wedding, her body was found on a remote gravel road in Monroe County. What initially seemed like an accident quickly developed into a homicide investigation. At the scene, investigators found no evidence of a struggle, and none of Molly's belongings were missing. Her jewelry remained untouched. Inside her car, police discovered wedding-related documents, including plans and checklists, everything bearing the name James. These clues led them directly to James's home. Around 2:30 a.m., officers knocked on James's door. However, instead of meeting a grieving fiancé, they encountered a woman, his wife, Melanie. This was shocking because Melanie was supposed to have died just days earlier in a hospital after a severe car accident. As it turned out, James had fabricated the entire story about Melanie's death. She was alive and still married to him, yet he had simultaneously planned to marry Molly. Both James and Melanie were taken in for questioning. Initially, detectives did not realize that Melanie was the woman James claimed was dead, only that they were dealing with James, who was allegedly involved in a murder while still married. Melanie, on the other hand, was blindsided. Melanie knew who Molly was, but thought she was just one of James's co-workers. When questioning turned to Molly's death, Melanie assumed the police were merely speaking to people who knew her. The truth came as a devastating shock. Melanie had no idea that her husband had been unfaithful, let alone engaged to another woman. James's double life had been so carefully hidden that Melanie, who lived in the same house as him, never suspected a thing. She told investigators that James came home every night like clockwork and showed no signs of dissatisfaction or a secret life. In hindsight, she began recalling suspicious details, such as how he often arrived home 2 hours late, which he brushed off as extra work or traffic. She had never pushed for explanations, and only now did the pieces begin to fall into place. Police uncovered that James had been living a double life for years. To Molly, James had claimed he was in the process of getting divorced, but in truth, he had never even filed for divorce. When questioned about his marital status, he invented a dramatic story about how his wife, Melanie, had been in a terrible car accident, was in a coma, and later died. Molly believed him. She trusted the man she loved and had no reason to doubt his word. Using this fictional story to hide his shady past, James accepts Molly's proposal and plans a wedding with her that he knows will never happen. When James's deception finally came to light, investigators began treating him as a suspect. Melanie provided a timeline for the night Molly was murdered. James had told her he was meeting a friend at 7:30 p.m., but he returned home closer to an hour later, claiming his friend had cancelled. However, Melanie and their teenage daughter contradicted his story. They recalled James arriving home closer to 10 p.m., far later than he had claimed. The timeline wasn't the only issue. Their daughter remembered that James went straight to the shower when he got home and then immediately started a load of laundry. For detectives, this behavior was telling. It suggested that James might have been trying to clean evidence like blood, dirt, or gun residue from his clothes. His alibi quickly unraveled. Police arrested James and scheduled formal questioning for the next day. Melanie, devastated by James's infidelity and deceit, returned home after giving her statement. Despite her heartbreak, she had to maintain a facade of normalcy for her daughter, who was excitedly preparing for a school dance. But behind closed doors, Melanie began searching for answers. Her investigation led her to the attic, where she uncovered shocking secrets hidden in a trunk: photos, letters, souvenirs, and evidence of a double life her husband had lived for 7 years. James had taken trips with another woman, Molly, claiming they were work-related or outings with friends. The betrayal was overwhelming. Melanie stayed composed for her daughter, but privately, she was unraveling a terrifying truth. This was not just a case of infidelity, but something far darker: murder. For nearly a decade, James had juggled 2 relationships, maintaining 2 homes and nearly entering into 2 marriages. But it all came to light when Molly, his mistress, was found dead. James's teenage daughter, Emma, didn't learn about her father's secret life from him or her mother. Instead, she discovered the shocking truth through an online news article her classmates had seen. Her world, once private, was now laid bare for everyone to see. For a teenager, the humiliation was unbearable. Whispers, stares, and judgment followed her through school hallways. As the story made national headlines, Emma uncovered even more heartbreaking details about her father's betrayal and Molly, the woman he had planned to marry. While reading news reports, Emma remembered she had met Molly before. Years earlier, her father had brought her to Molly's home to help sew a cosplay costume. At the time, Emma believed Molly was just a friend. Now, the memory seemed painfully clear as Emma and her mother, Melanie, struggled to come to terms with the betrayal. Law enforcement continued connecting the dots, building a case against James. At the scene of Molly's murder, investigators found tire tracks matching James's car. His vehicle had mud on it, consistent with the rural road where Molly had been killed. More damning evidence surfaced when they recovered a white t-shirt nearby, customized by Emma as a gift for her father. The t-shirt contained traces of gunpowder and Molly's DNA, making James the prime suspect. While the bullet that killed Molly was too damaged to be traced to a specific gun, the circumstantial evidence against James was strong. Phone records revealed that James had called Molly the night she died, speaking with her for 20 minutes near the site where her body was discovered. Additionally, Glenn McParron, the man who found Molly's body, testified that he had briefly encountered a white man, around 50 years old, near the scene that night. Prosecutors argued this man was James. Prosecutors argued that James's motive was fear. Molly had grown suspicious and had begun searching online for information about James's wife, Melanie. She found no obituaries or hospital records because Melanie was still alive. Once Molly discovered the truth, prosecutors believed James saw her as a threat to his secrets. Instead of ending the affair or confessing, he allegedly decided to silence Molly permanently. What made his crime so alarming wasn't just its brutality, but also its carelessness. James left a shirt designed by Emma at the crime scene and his name on documents in Molly's car. He behaved as if his actions couldn't be traced, but the evidence trail he left behind was glaring. The trial began on April 26, 2021, with prosecutors presenting tire tread analyses, forensic evidence, and witness testimonies to reveal the full scope of James's actions. Melanie testified, stating that she had no knowledge of her husband's affair and describing him as controlling, manipulative, and fully capable of murder. Emma's testimony added a chilling layer to an already disturbing case. She recalled her father, James, coming home late after 10 p.m. on the night of Molly's death. He went straight to the shower, and soon after, the washing machine started running. The strong smell of bleach filled the house. Emma remembered how nervous and on edge he seemed, behaving uncharacteristically. He lingered near her, silently, watching, then eventually walked away. Melanie revealed that during Molly's murder, she was still married to James, living under the same roof, and believing her life was normal. She had no idea her husband was leading a double life, using a separate phone to communicate with another woman. By the early hours of April 28, 2018, Melanie was grappling with an avalanche of devastating revelations. She discovered that her husband of more than 20 years had been planning to marry another woman. James had even fraudulently signed a marriage license, claiming to be divorced. The fantasy life he had woven with Molly was built on deception and ultimately ended in violence. Melanie had been unaware of his infidelity, that he had told others she was dead, and that her name was used to invent a fabricated tragedy. On the night of the murder, James had left their house in blue jeans, a black jacket, and boots. The next day, after the police left, Melanie began searching their home. Something felt off. She noticed his black jacket was missing, questioned him about it, but never got an answer. Her search led her to the garage, where James had parked a maroon car, unusually inside rather than outside, where he normally left it. Her suspicion deepened. During his trial, James Addy refused to testify in his defense, but submitted a written statement, a love letter to Molly, the same woman he stood accused of murdering. This act felt either disturbingly delusional or deeply arrogant. Later, he requested a new trial, claiming inadequate defense representation and alleging that some evidence in his favor had been withheld. However, the jury was unmoved. In July 2021, James Addy was convicted of first-degree murder and armed criminal action. He received a life sentence without parole, plus an additional 10 years. To the end, he declared his innocence and vowed to appeal. Reports surfaced of James confessing to a fellow inmate, bluntly stating that he ended up in prison because someone ended up face down in a ditch. By then, the damage was irreparable. In April 2018, instead of celebrating a wedding, Molly's family and friends gathered to bury her. What should have been the start of her new life became the date now etched on her headstone. But the tragedies didn't end there. In the ensuing months, her parents, Timothy and Sandy Watson, also passed away, unable to bear the devastation of losing their daughter. Sandy experienced severe psychological trauma after Molly's murder, and her mental health rapidly declined. Timothy, who devoted himself to caring for his wife during this time, succumbed to a heart attack in September 2020. The relentless stress, grief, and sorrow had taken its toll on him as well. Neither of them lived to see justice done or hear the guilty verdict in the courtroom. They were not there to witness the man responsible for their daughter's death being led away in handcuffs. Meanwhile, Molly's son, Declan, was left without a mother. After her death, ensuring his care became a priority. Thankfully, he was placed with relatives who are raising him in a loving and supportive home. A small glimmer of hope in an otherwise heartbreaking story. Tim, Molly's brother, now acts as the spokesperson for their family. In court, he addressed the jury with not only grief, but also a profound sense of urgency. He spoke of the devastating impact of Molly's murder, how the loss of his younger sister had not only been a terrible shock, but had also brought with it the loss of his parents. He shared how his mother had succumbed to mental illness, his father had passed away from grief, and how the absence of his 3 loved ones had left a painful void in his life where there had once been joy. Tim implored the jury to deliver justice, emphasizing that Molly had dreams, a career, and a son. She had been a bright, passionate individual full of life, but everything was taken from her in a single, selfish act. Tim told the jury that James had mercilessly chosen to take Molly's life and urged them to deliver a verdict that showed no mercy to him in return. Leslie Pirllo, a 21-year-old woman, worked at the law library in the Palo Alto courthouse in California and lived there with her family. She led a normal life and was studying at Stanford University at the time of a tragic incident in 1973. With ambition and determination, she focused on developing her career before thinking about settling down and starting a family. On Tuesday, February 13th, 1973, Leslie was last seen leaving work around 3 p.m. When she did not return home, her family initially assumed she might have gone for her usual walk around the Stanford campus, but as time passed and she still hadn't appeared, they began to worry. After contacting friends and colleagues, but no one had any information about her, the family organized a search. When their efforts led nowhere, they reported her missing to the police, who took the situation seriously and began investigating. 2 days later, on February 15th, officers discovered Leslie's body in bushes near the university campus. She had been strangled with her scarf and showed clear signs of a brutal attack, including bruises covering her body. Evidence revealed that she had been abused, and her underwear and pantyhose were stuffed into her throat. She was partially undressed, and blood stained her clothing. The autopsy confirmed strangulation as the cause of death, and further evidence, nail clippings and bodily fluids, indicated she had fought back fiercely. At the time, forensic technology, such as DNA profiling, was not advanced, and there were no criminal databases near where the body was found. Police found Leslie's orange Chevrolet Nova abandoned near an old, deserted building. Her shoes were still in the car, but no significant evidence was gathered from the car or the scene. Despite efforts to identify suspects, none of Leslie's friends, family, or colleagues could provide clues. Leslie, described by everyone as calm and unassuming, made the murder a huge shock to all who knew her. The investigation quickly stalled after all potential suspects close to Leslie were ruled out through verified alibis. After 5 days, law enforcement turned to the public for help, releasing details about her car and its isolated parking location, hoping for witnesses. Police received several tips through phone calls, though none led to viable leads. A month later, authorities discovered the body of a young man named Mark Roswell, who had died just half a kilometer from where Leslie was found. Mark has ties to the court where Leslie works, is currently on probation for distributing illegal substances. Investigators looked into the possibility of a connection between Leslie and Mark, suspecting that Mark's case may have been motivated by guilt. However, interviews with courthouse staff confirmed there was no known relationship between the two. Family and friends of both Leslie and Mark were unable to establish any link. After thoroughly investigating Mark's background, detectives found no evidence suggesting a history of violent crime. His only prior offense was dealing banned substances. Ultimately, Mark was ruled out as a suspect. Despite significant efforts, Leslie's case remained unsolved. During this time, a new lead surfaced when a police officer contacted the station. Although he had been off duty on the night Leslie was killed, he had seen her car by chance while driving home through a secluded area. According to his report, on Tuesday, February 13th, He noticed an orange Chevrolet parked near an abandoned building. The sight caught his attention because the location was usually deserted. Alongside the Chevrolet, he saw a gray car and a young man with long blonde hair standing between the two vehicles. Leaning over as if speaking to someone, he observed the situation for a while, but did not notice anything overtly suspicious, so he continued on his way. While his account provided some useful information, he unfortunately didn't recall the license plate of the gray car. Based on certain evidence, detectives began to suspect that Leslie might have been the victim of not just a violent crime, but also a serial killer. Their suspicions were reinforced by the fact that several serial killers were active in the state during the early 1970s. The media immediately picked up on this theory, and over the years, speculations arose that Leslie might have been a victim of infamous killers like the Zodiac or Herbert Mullin, both of whom were responsible for multiple murders in the region. Even Ted Bundy was considered a suspect, as he was attending school in San Francisco during this period and lived near Stanford. Another theory attributed her death to a cult known as the Angels of Death, whose victims were found in San Francisco. However, as the investigation struggled to gain traction, detectives explored every lead. Over time, prominent suspects such as Ted Bundy, the Zodiac, and others were cleared of involvement. A year after Leslie's tragic death, another devastating incident shook the community. On Sunday, March 24, 1974, 21-year-old Janet Taylor was preparing for a busy day of work and visiting friends. Her car had broken down the day before and was in the repair shop, so her father gave her a ride to work. After finishing her shift, Janet planned to stop by her friend Deborah's house. Janet was a young woman full of ambition. She had recently turned 21 and was the daughter of a well-known university coach. She worked hard as a university student and dreamed of a successful career. That evening, after spending time with Deborah, Janet realized around 7 p.m. that she urgently needed to return home to let the dogs out for a walk. Wanting to avoid inconveniencing anyone, she refused to call her father or accept Deborah's help. Instead, she decided to hitchhike to her home in La Honda, a short distance away in an area surrounded by nature reserves near Stanford. Confident in her decision, Janet believed there was no reason to worry, and Deborah didn't perceive any danger either, a mistake that would prove to be fatal. The next morning, Janet's boyfriend noticed that she hadn't returned home. Alarmed, he contacted her friends and family to try to determine what had happened, but no one had seen her. Later that same morning, a milk delivery driver traveling near Stanford noticed something suspicious on the side of the road. When he stopped to investigate, he made a horrifying discovery. It was the body of a young woman. When the police arrived, they identified the victim as Janet Taylor. She had been strangled with her own sweater. Although she was clothed, her shoes were missing. Oddly, her feet were clean, despite the heavy rain the night before. While her body was damp, the ground underneath was dry, suggesting she had been placed there after her death. Janet's clothes were torn, and, like Leslie's, her underwear and stockings had been forcibly shoved into her throat. Investigators confirmed that she had been abused before being killed and subjected to prolonged beatings. Some of her belongings were missing initially, but were later found scattered along the roadside. Her clothes had been discarded over a stretch of approximately 500 meters on both sides of the road, leading investigators to believe the killer had deliberately disposed of them while driving. Janet's body was discovered just 2 kilometers away from the location where Leslie's body had been found the previous year. Not only did both women share a striking similarity in appearance, but the perpetrator also used similar methods in both crimes. These resemblances strongly suggested that the two women had fallen victim to the same serial killer. The shocking connection alarmed the community, heightening concern as the realization of a potential serial murderer set in. Rumors quickly spread that a maniac was active in the area, leaving residents feeling unsafe. People criticized the police for failing to stop the violent crime wave gripping the city. One curious detail united the victims: they were all found barefoot, with their shoes discovered far from their bodies. The victims, all young women, were similarly dressed in raincoats, a coincidence likely explained by the weather. However, the absence of their bags appeared deliberate. It was confirmed that Leslie and Janet had carried bags, but these were never recovered. Some speculated that the killer kept the items as trophies, a behavior often associated with serial offenders. Once the similarities in the cases were identified, the two police departments began collaborating. Shortly after Janet's murder, Peter Thompson was attacked in a seemingly unrelated incident on March 30, 1974 in California. At 4:20 am, a passing motorist discovered Peter, bloody and injured, near his parked car by the roadside. The motorist called for help, and police arrived to investigate. In the back seat of Peter's car, they found broken beer bottles, which appeared to have been used to cut his face. Peter explained to detectives that he had picked up a hitchhiker who attacked him after provoking a conflict. Meanwhile, forensic experts searched the area around Peter's car and the spot where the hitchhiker was allegedly picked up. Nearby, they discovered an open beer pack matching the broken bottles found in Peter's car. At the same time, a deputy sheriff reported seeing a suspicious man with long blonde hair who ran away upon noticing the officer. Unfortunately, the man evaded capture. It is noteworthy that a person with similar characteristics was also seen near the scene of Leslie's murder. Detectives questioned Peter further, during which something unsettling emerged when asked for his contact information. Peter provided the details of a woman named Barbara Rocky, claiming he had met her before. Investigators soon learned, however, that Barbara had been murdered 2 weeks earlier, on March 11, 1974, in Utah, near the Grand Canyon. Barbara, a 22-year-old college student, had been killed after voluntarily going with her attacker. She was abused and then shot 5 times in the back with her own Magnum .357 pistol. Chillingly, her killer had carefully folded her clothes beside her body, suggesting an emotional attachment to her. Barbara's death raised further questions. Detectives discovered that she was acquainted with Janet Taylor, one of the other victims, a connection that appeared too coincidental to ignore. Peter's claim of knowing Barbara came under intense scrutiny, especially since he appeared confused during questioning and delayed his responses, as though crafting a story. However, the investigation ultimately revealed no evidence linking Peter to the murders. He had no motive, and it was confirmed that he was not in Utah at the time of Barbara's death. His account of the hitchhiker attack remained plausible, with no conclusive evidence to prove or disprove it. Nevertheless, investigators continued exploring possible connections between Barbara and the other victims, interviewing those close to her. This effort led them to Gerald Hicker, a former university classmate of Barbara's with a documented history of violence against women. Further investigation revealed that Gerald was responsible for Barbara's murder. Despite this breakthrough, no evidence linked Gerald to the murders of Leslie or Janet, even though Barbara's case bore similarities to the others. Ultimately, Gerald was charged only in Barbara's death, leaving the murders of Leslie and Janet unsolved. In March 1975, a year after Janet's disappearance, the investigation into her case took an unexpected turn. A local journalist reported that San Mateo County Sheriff's deputies had searched a rental room based on a tip from an anonymous source. The room had been rented by a long-term tenant who had moved out a few weeks earlier. The tenant was reportedly behaving suspiciously, and during the search, police discovered photographs of a woman resembling Janet Taylor, along with a newspaper article about her murder. The young man who had occupied the room was quickly located. However, he remained calm and claimed to have been a close friend of Janet. Witnesses confirmed their friendship, and his possession of the photographs and the newspaper clipping was deemed innocent memorabilia. As a result, he was not arrested. In July 1975, the San Mateo newspaper published another story, reporting that investigators working on Barbara's murder were exploring possible links to Janet's case and had uncovered new leads. Though no specific suspect was mentioned, a police officer stated that progress had been made and an arrest was expected soon. At that time, it seemed as if investigators were once again considering Peter Thompson's involvement. Janet and Barbara were acquaintances who were killed within 2 weeks of each other. Peter Thompson, a mutual friend, died under suspicious circumstances shortly after their deaths. Witnesses reported seeing a long-haired hitchhiker who matched Peter's description, driving a car associated with Leslie's disappearance. However, Peter was eventually ruled out as a suspect. After his death, the investigation stalled, and there were no significant developments for decades. The case remained dormant until 2008, when true crime enthusiasts speculated whether Ted Bundy could have been involved in the Stanford killings. Investigators explored this possibility, but found no evidence connecting Ted to the crimes. By that point, law enforcement had determined with confidence that Barbara's murder was unrelated to the murders of Janet and Leslie. Despite these conclusions, murders continued to occur in the Stanford area, and new victims occasionally emerged. For instance, in October 1974, Alice Perry was found murdered. Like the others, there were no immediate suspects. Authorities believed a serial killer might be targeting victims around Stanford, further complicating efforts to solve the original cases. These investigations extended well into the 1980s. When Ted Bundy was arrested and sentenced to death in Florida, he began confessing to unsolved murders, eventually admitting to 23 killings across Washington, Oregon, Utah, Colorado, and Florida. However, no documented murders were tied to Leslie and Janet. Investigators made several attempts to link him to the Stanford murders, but all efforts failed. He was executed in 1989, by which time authorities had definitively ruled him out as a suspect in the murders of Janet and Leslie through DNA evidence. These cases remained unsolved for decades, with frustration further muddling the investigation. For example, serial killer Herbert Mullin, who confessed to murdering 13 victims, killed his last victim on the same day Leslie disappeared, just a few kilometers from where her body was later found. Similarly, Ted Bundy had reportedly been in the Stanford area at the time of Leslie's murder, and her appearance matched his victim profile. However, DNA evidence eventually excluded him as a suspect. For many detectives, coincidences are rarely dismissed, but in this case, the overlapping incidents only clouded the investigation and delayed progress. Meanwhile, the real killer remained at large. The cases saw no breakthroughs until 2016, when investigators reopened several cold cases. They revisited the murders of Leslie and Janet, this time utilizing innovative genetic genealogy techniques developed by Parabon Nanolabs. Law enforcement had collected DNA evidence from the abuse and suspected killer at the very beginning, and all samples were sent for genealogical analysis. This seemed promising because the company's innovative techniques had already solved several cold cases that had remained unsolved for decades. After completing the genealogical analysis, detectives received the results. Using the DNA profile, they created a family tree, and by 2018, the police identified a possible suspect. However, they couldn't confront him directly. Instead, detectives began discreetly monitoring 74-year-old John Gatri. One day, during surveillance, John and his wife visited a coffee shop. After drinking his coffee, John discarded his cup in the trash. Detectives quickly retrieved the cup and sent it for testing. The DNA sample from the cup matched 100% with the traces found on the bodies of Leslie Pirllo and Janet Taylor. In 2018, John was living with his wife in Hayward, California. He was arrested for the murders committed in 1973. 45 years after the crimes, investigators discovered that John, a medical technician at Stanford Hospital at the time, had no known connection to the victims. During the initial investigation, John had already attracted suspicion due to his criminal history. His record showed a pattern of incidents of an abusive nature, with his criminal behavior beginning in his youth. For instance, on June 8, 1963, when he was 18, John offered to walk 15-year-old Margaret Williams home after a dance near the military base where she lived with her family in Bad Kreuznach, Germany. Margaret never made it home. When Margaret missed her curfew, her family immediately alerted the police. Within 2 hours, her body was found. Witnesses helped authorities identify John as the perpetrator. He had taken Margaret to a baseball field, assaulted her, abused her, and killed her by striking her on the head. Found guilty, John faced a maximum sentence of 10 years under the laws at the time. Ultimately, he served 6 years in a juvenile prison and was released early in 1969 under the condition that he leave Germany. He returned to the United States, secured a job at a hospital, and married his colleague Susan, who had a daughter, Katie, from a previous relationship. For 8 years, John appeared to be a decent family man. However, during this time, he abused his stepdaughter Katie, threatening to kill her mother if she reported him. Katie later described him as a monster. In 1977, Susan caught John abusing her daughter Katie. They divorced, but for reasons unknown, Susan did not report the abuse to the police. A few months later, John married Linda Caputa, with whom he remained married for 24 years until her death in 2002. They had 2 children, and John appeared to be a loving and responsible father. For years, John's children and others believed the allegations against him were false, unaware that he had killed Leslie in 1973 and Janet in 1974. In 1975, however, John was involved in another crime that finally drew law enforcement's attention. He was charged with abusing a 17-year-old girl in Santa Clara County while serving as a leader of a youth scout organization. He pled guilty as part of a plea bargain and received a lenient sentence, 6 months in prison and a small fine. This crime demonstrated that he was prone to abusing and strangling his victims, but authorities still did not connect him to Leslie and Janet's murders. At one point, John was even considered a suspect. A San Mateo County Sheriff's deputy noticed that John's criminal behavior closely resembled the killer's methods in the Janet Taylor case. However, in the 1970s, DNA technology was unavailable, which prevented law enforcement from creating a DNA profile to confirm his guilt. Decades later, with advancements in DNA technology, John Gatri was finally identified as the primary suspect in these brutal crimes. The investigators reanalyzed all the evidence they possessed at the time, which led to the development of a male DNA profile based on biological fluid traces collected from the victim's clothing. When this DNA was compared to a sample from John Gatri, it was a 100% match, confirming him as the perpetrator. This revelation sparked mixed emotions, especially within the local community. Many criticized the police, as John had initially been wrongfully suspected of murdering Arliss Perry. The true perpetrator, when approached for arrest, took his own life, a tragic pattern that would repeat decades later. However, John was far from blameless in other violent incidents. As investigators delved into his past, they uncovered that he had lived in Aga and New Jersey for several years, during which women frequently reported similar attacks. These findings suggested he may have been responsible for many more crimes. While authorities investigated John's potential involvement in other unsolved murders, prosecutors in 2 counties prepared for trials linked to separate cases. After the arrest of a suspect in Leslie's murder, the same individual was charged 6 months later with Janet's murder. In both cases, DNA evidence served as the primary foundation. Janet's and Leslie's families were determined to seek justice. They refused to negotiate, ensuring the criminal would face the full consequences of his actions. During the trial, Susan's daughter, Katie, who had suffered abuse at his hands and was familiar with John's cruel tendencies, provided crucial testimony. Upon learning about the murders, Katie was horrified to realize she could have become one of his victims. She recalled how she and John would pass the location where Leslie's body was found nearly every day on their way to school. At the time of both crimes, John was approximately 30 years old. Notably, witnesses described a suspect with long blonde hair at the scene, raising questions about whether John had an accomplice or whether he disguised himself by wearing a wig. On September 15, 2021, John Gatri, then 77 years old and in custody, was convicted of Janet Taylor's murder. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. In 2023, he confessed to Leslie Perloff's murder and received a second life sentence. While this confession offered some relief to the victims' families, it was devastating for John's loved ones, who had steadfastly believed in his innocence. Following these convictions, his children publicly disowned him. Later that year, John passed away in prison. According to the official report, his death was due to natural causes. Detectives remain convinced that he was responsible for other murders, but have yet to gather sufficient evidence to conclusively link him to additional crimes. Roberta Aggiassi grew up in the small town of Vasto, in the province of Chieti, Abruzzo, southeastern Italy. Her parents, along with most of her extended family, also lived there. She shared a particularly close bond with her mother. They confided in each other and were always in touch. From a young age, Roberta was known for her outgoing nature, kind heart, and cheerful personality. She excelled as a student and developed a deep passion for cooking, particularly showcasing her talent in baking pies and cakes. She was well liked by her peers and cherished spending time with her many friends. After completing public school, Roberta enrolled in Italy's School of Hospitality and Culinary Arts. At the age of 20, she began working at the most renowned bakery in her hometown, owned by the Lello family. Every family member participated in the bakery's operations, and Roberta became close friends with Fabio di Lello, the younger son, who was her age and worked alongside her. Spending so much time together, their friendship quickly blossomed into a romantic relationship. Both families were very supportive of they. Roberta's parents took an immediate liking to Fabio, and Fabio's parents admired Roberta for her strong work ethic and sense of responsibility. By the age of 25, Roberta and Fabio had moved in together, sharing a rented apartment while saving money to buy their own home. Fabio, a passionate and dedicated soccer player since childhood, had achieved notable success. He served as the captain of the city's soccer team and performed impressively in amateur tournaments. In 2014, he made his debut in Serie D, the highest amateur soccer division under the Italian National League Federation. In 2015, Roberta and Fabio achieved a milestone in their lives. That autumn, they celebrated their wedding with a grand ceremony and moved into a spacious and cozy house of their own. They were overjoyed and excited about their future, making plans they were eager to fulfill, plans that would tragically never come to fruition. On the morning of Friday, July the 1st, 2016, Roberta, then 34, called her mother, as she did every day. She suggested having dinner that evening at her parents' house, intending to gather everyone there to share exciting news. Keeping the announcement a surprise, she planned to reveal it at dinner and agreed with her mother to prepare the meal and set the table together. Around 2 p.m., Roberta left her house on her scooter, heading to her parents' home, just a few kilometers away, a trip that usually took about 10 minutes. Tragically, Roberta never arrived. While passing through one of the busiest intersections in town and carefully obeying traffic rules, a Fiat Punto sped through a red light from the opposite lane and collided violently with her scooter. The car then crashed into another vehicle. The force of the impact threw Roberta into a metal pole and onto the sidewalk. She sustained a severe, traumatic brain injury, lost a significant amount of blood, and was barely alive by the time emergency services arrived. Paramedics were astonished that Roberta was still alive, given the extent of her injuries. She was rushed to the nearest hospital and immediately taken into surgery. Despite the efforts of the top surgeons, who worked tirelessly for nearly an hour, her injuries were simply too severe. Roberta passed away without regaining consciousness. The drivers of the other two vehicles involved in the crash suffered only minor injuries and did not require hospitalization. The driver of the Fiat Punto was identified as 21-year-old local resident Italo De Lisa. He remained at the scene visibly shaken and did not attempt to flee. He waited for the police to arrive, cooperated fully, and explained what had happened. He admitted he had briefly taken his eyes off the road and failed to notice the traffic light turning red. By the time he realized, it was too late to avoid the collision. After hitting Roberta's scooter, he panicked, swerved into oncoming traffic, and struck another car. He willingly handed over his documents and underwent a toxicology screening at the hospital, which confirmed that he was not under the influence of alcohol or any banned substances. Witnesses and officers noted his profound remorse. Upon learning later that Roberta had not survived, he was overcome with distress and nearly collapsed. Fabio was the first to hear the devastating news. He rushed to the hospital just minutes after his wife, Roberta, had been brought in. In the hallway, he broke down, crying and praying, desperately pleading for updates from every doctor and nurse who entered or left the operating room. About 30 minutes later, the surgeon came out and, after a pause, informed Fabio that they had done everything possible, but Roberta could not be saved. Fabio's reaction was heartbreaking. Stunned and in denial, he repeatedly begged to see Roberta, clinging to the hope that there had been some mistake. But the truth was inescapable. She had passed away. As the reality sunk in, Fabio was overtaken by grief and anger. Overwhelmed, he reportedly wanted to confront the person responsible immediately. Hospital staff had to physically restrain him and escort him to a private room where he was given a sedative to calm down. At the same time, Italo, the driver responsible for the crash, was deeply shaken, repeatedly saying he didn't deserve forgiveness. Meanwhile, Roberta's parents were growing anxious. Their daughter was overdue and not answering her phone. They began calling Fabio, who initially didn't pick up. When he finally answered, he tearfully broke the tragic news. Within 15 minutes, both Roberta's and Fabio's families gathered at the hospital, struggling to process the devastating loss. Their vibrant and joyful lives, filled with dreams and plans, had been shattered in an instant. Instead of celebrating Roberta and Fabio's upcoming anniversary, they were now faced with the unimaginable task of saying goodbye to her. Roberta was laid to rest on July 3, 2016, just 2 months before what would have been her and Fabio's first wedding anniversary. The farewell took place in the same church where they had recently pledged their love and commitment. The priest who officiated their wedding also led this deeply somber memorial service. The small church overflowed with mourners. So many people came that not everyone could fit inside. Roberta was beloved and well-respected in her community, and friends, neighbors, and colleagues gathered to honor her memory and support her grieving family. The tragedy left the entire town in shock. Few could believe she was truly gone. The man responsible for the fatal crash, Italo, did not flee the scene. He cooperated fully and underwent medical testing at the hospital. He was completely sober and had no history of mental illness or emotional instability. The crash happened at a busy intersection, equipped with multiple traffic cameras. The police reviewed footage from 4 different angles, clearly capturing the accident. Investigators also retrieved surveillance videos showing the routes both drivers took prior to the crash. The footage revealed that both vehicles had adhered to traffic laws and speed limits. However, at the crucial moment, Italo failed to stop at a red light. He drove through the intersection, colliding with the scooter Roberta was riding. After hitting Roberta, Italo's Fiat Punto struck another car coming from the opposite direction. Fortunately, the driver of the second car was not seriously injured, and his vehicle damage was covered by insurance, so he did not pursue legal action. Tragically, Roberta's injuries were far too severe to be treated. Italo expressed his deep regret, claiming he had been distracted for just a moment. Despite his regret, nothing could ease the pain of Roberta's loved ones, particularly Fabio, who struggled to suppress his anger toward the man responsible. The 21-year-old driver, Italo, was arrested and formally charged with involuntary harm, causing fatal injuries. He was placed in pre-trial detention while awaiting the court proceedings. He did not contest the charges, declaring that he was ready to accept any punishment imposed. Fabio closely followed every development in the investigation. He meticulously reviewed all available evidence and met with detectives daily in his search for answers and any additional leads. Fabio strongly rejected the official findings, convinced that Italo or his family had influenced the authorities to minimize his responsibility for the accident. Fabio believed the crash was caused by substance use and was determined to keep the case in the public eye. Fabio organized protests and marches, demanding full accountability from Italo for the fatal accident. Many people, especially those who had known Roberta, supported him. Fabio also launched an aggressive online campaign against Italo and his family, accusing him of intentional misconduct, banned substance use, and claiming that his relatives had bribed officials to tamper with the toxicology report. His social media posts, filled with accusations and cries for justice, appeared daily. On July 15, 2016, Fabio organized a memorial march for Roberta, attended by hundreds, carrying her photos and signs demanding justice. Fabio's rhetoric grew more intense, threatening further demonstrations and even suggesting, during emotional outbursts, that he might take matters into his own hands if the authorities failed to act. His increasingly confrontational tone stirred public outrage but also alarmed Italo's family, who began fearing for their safety. Fabio's hostility toward Italo was evident as he worked to sway public opinion against him. Fabio's actions hinted at a willingness to disregard the law to seek retribution. In response, Italo's family filed for a court order to protect themselves, citing Fabio's harassment and threats. The case remained under investigation with incomplete evidence, but the situation was becoming dangerously volatile and required urgent legal action. On July 20th, Fabio was issued a court order barring him from accusing Italo of a crime, inciting hatred, posting harmful content online, or encouraging hostility toward Italo or his family. Fabio complied, but abruptly withdrew from public advocacy, leaving others unsettled by his silence. Every day, Fabio visited the grave of his late wife, Roberta, bringing fresh flowers. He spent hours there, sometimes standing silently, other times kneeling, crying, or praying. His family, hoping he just needed time to grieve, chose not to intervene, but his behavior only escalated. Fabio erected a memorial at the accident site and turned Roberta's gravesite into a detailed tribute with photos from their happiest moments. He began spending entire days at the cemetery. He quit soccer, his lifelong passion, and stopped going to work. Nothing seemed to matter to Fabio anymore. His life revolved around the flower-covered grave. He ate little, lost significant weight, and looked pale and exhausted. Within weeks, he appeared drastically older, withdrawn from others. Fabio grew disconnected from reality. One morning, cemetery staff found Fabio at Roberta's grave before opening hours. He had climbed the fence overnight, saying he needed to be close to her. He told relatives he couldn't bear staying in their home, filled with memories of Roberta. Only at her gravesite did he feel any peace. Fabio spoke to her as though she was still alive, refusing to refer to her in the past tense. Fabio's older brother suggested a brief trip to Rome to help him clear his head, but Fabio refused, insisting he couldn't leave Roberta alone in the cemetery. This was a clear sign that Fabio needed more than the support of loved ones. He required urgent professional psychiatric care. Fabio's brother and other family members dismissed his concerning words and erratic behavior, believing time would heal him. Unfortunately, they were tragically wrong. Meanwhile, the parents of Italo, who was still in custody, hired a top attorney to defend their son. The lawyer was confident from the start, highlighting that Italo had no prior criminal record, rarely broke traffic laws, and tested sober at the time of the incident. While the attorney admitted that running a red light was a mistake, he argued there was no evidence to support serious charges, such as premeditated intent. He also pointed out that Italo had followed the speed limit throughout his drive, and it remained unclear what had distracted him. To support their case, the defense presented character testimonials from Italo's school and workplace, as well as evidence of his volunteer work in environmental causes and his enrollment in firefighter training courses. Italo had planned to dedicate himself to public service after finishing his certification exams. During the trial, the defense submitted surveillance footage showing Roberta on her scooter without a helmet, which violated safety regulations. The attorney argued that wearing a helmet could have lessened the severity of her injuries and perhaps even saved her life. Considering this footage, Italo's clean record, and Roberta's safety oversight, the court modified his pre-trial conditions. He was released under judicial supervision shortly before Christmas 2016, with the final decision scheduled for February 2017. Other than a few restrictions, Italo resumed a normal life. When Fabio learned that the man responsible for the accident had been released, he was consumed by rage. In court, he shouted and tried to physically confront Italo and Italo's attorney. Family members struggled to hold him back, and the judge ordered him to be removed from the courtroom. After Italo's release, Fabio became sleepless, angry, and withdrawn. He spent countless hours by Roberta's grave, talking to her as if she was still alive. Despite Fabio's worsening mental state, his family did not seek professional help. They thought he just needed more time to heal. When they suggested seeing a mental health specialist, Fabio reacted with hostility. He began accusing the justice system of being corrupt and incapable of delivering a fair outcome. When Italo was allowed to await trial out of custody, Fabio completely lost faith in the law. He decided to take matters into his own hands, but didn't reveal his plans to anyone. His behavior shifted noticeably. He became increasingly secretive and withdrawn. Fabio had an interest in firearms dating back to his youth. He regularly visited shooting ranges and, in 2006, obtained a firearm license, purchasing a 9mm pistol that he kept secured in a safe at home. Now consumed by thoughts of vengeance, he started handling the weapon often, convinced that it was his only means of achieving justice. As New Year's approached, Fabio's social media activity took a dark turn. He began posting about justice, revenge, and reflections on life's meaning, lamenting how his own life had lost purpose. These posts were deeply troubling, but sadly, they went unnoticed. In January, Fabio began secretly following Italo to avoid drawing attention. Fabio observed his daily routines, the places he visited, and the people he interacted with. Using this information, Fabio devised a plan. On February 1, 2017, he took a loaded pistol and went to a bar on Via Perth, a location Italo frequented and close to his home. Fabio entered the bar to confirm Italo was there. After spotting him, he left quietly and found a discreet location nearby to wait. Around 9:30 p.m., Italo exited the bar, chatted briefly with friends, and was about to head home. At that moment, Fabio confronted him. Italo sensed something was wrong, and both men froze briefly. Then Fabio pulled out his pistol and fired 3 shots at close range. The first shot struck Italo in the abdomen, the second near his heart, and the third, a headshot, ensured there was no chance of survival. Fabio, an experienced marksman, executed the act with precision, leaving no room for error. Afterward, Fabio walked calmly to his car. Witnesses, shocked by what they had seen, were too afraid to intervene, knowing he likely wouldn't hesitate to use the weapon again. Emergency responders arrived quickly, but Italo was pronounced dead at the scene. Police interviewed witnesses and were able to identify Fabio as the perpetrator. When officers went to his house, he wasn't there. Fabio's family, upon learning what happened, informed police of where he was likely headed. Authorities intercepted him on his way to the cemetery. Fabio had planned to end his life at Roberta's grave after what he believed was an act of justice over her death. However, police arrived before he could carry out the plan. He didn't resist arrest, showed no emotion, and openly admitted to the crime. At the police station, Fabio broke down. He spoke of his intense love for his wife, Roberta, and his anger with the justice system for allowing Italo to walk free after the car accident that killed her. Then he revealed an even deeper motive. Roberta had been pregnant. Though it was still early in the pregnancy, they had discovered the news just one day before the fatal crash. Roberta had planned to surprise their families with the announcement during dinner, a moment that never came. The accident had taken both her and their unborn child. Fabio said his actions were retaliation for the loss of not just his wife, but also the future they were building. He expressed that he had nothing left to live for, wanting only to reunite with his family. After his arrest, Fabio was sent for psychiatric evaluation. Doctors diagnosed him with acute psychological trauma caused by profound grief. However, the court determined that Fabio had acted deliberately and with full awareness of his actions. He was charged with first-degree premeditated murder. While awaiting trial, Fabio made several attempts to harm himself and was placed under strict supervision. On March 24, 2017, he was found guilty and sentenced to 30 years in prison. Fabio showed no emotion during the verdict, appearing detached from the moment. His family and legal team appealed the sentence, which was later reduced to 20 years. In prison, Fabio reportedly turned to religion for some solace, but never fully recovered from the loss of his wife and unborn child. Samantha Vernagallo and Drew Garnier first crossed paths as young adults on Long Island, New York, where they both grew up. While the specifics of their first meeting remain private, it's clear that their connection blossomed during their early 20s. Samantha, who lives in Center Reach, is a former student of Center Reach High School. She is well liked for her warm, caring personality and her dream of raising a happy family. Drew, from nearby Lake Grove, shared her aspirations for a traditional family life. Over time, their bond deepened as they discovered they both envisioned the same future: marriage, children, and building a meaningful life together. Samantha appreciates Drew's stability and commitment to creating a safe living environment. Those who know them see them as a loving couple, working toward a common goal of a happy future. Thanks to the support from their family, both Samantha and Drew grew up mature and did not face any serious issues. Neither had a troubling past. No criminal records, substance abuse, or significant mental health concerns. Drew held steady employment and showed dedication to supporting his growing family, while Samantha was known for her beauty, compassion, and devotion to her loved ones. After several years together, they married and had 2 daughters, Adelina, followed by Izzy. 3 years later, Samantha embraced motherhood wholeheartedly, always putting her daughters first and ensuring they felt safe and loved. As the family grew, they began to feel the financial pressures of living on Long Island, dreaming of a quieter, more affordable life where their daughters could thrive. Samantha and Drew decided to leave Long Island and relocate to Masonville, a small town in Delaware County, New York, situated in the scenic Catskills region, about 150 miles northwest of New York City. Masonville offered the simpler lifestyle they desired: lower living costs, a close-knit community, and a peaceful environment where children could safely play and grow. The family settled into a mobile home on Hook Road, a quiet area where neighbors knew one another and a sense of community prevailed. For Samantha and Drew, the move symbolized a fresh start. Samantha envisioned an idyllic childhood for her daughters, filled with natural beauty, fresh air, and the security of a supportive community. She remained fully committed to her family, caring deeply for her 9-year-old daughter Adelina and 6-year-old Izzy. Drew quickly adapted to the new lifestyle as well, finding work and showing dedication to his family. From the outside, Drew and Samantha Garnier appeared to have a strong marriage and a happy family life. Their life in Masonville seemed stable and focused on building a better future for their 2 daughters. Their joy grew even more when Samantha found out she was pregnant with their 3rd child. By September 2024, she was 5 months along and had learned they were expecting another daughter. For Samantha, this news brought immense happiness. She cherished being a mother and was excited about welcoming another little girl. However, those close to the family noticed that Drew's reaction to the news was quite different. While Samantha celebrated the idea of another daughter, Drew had been hoping for a son. Family members later revealed that Drew's desire for a boy had intensified with each pregnancy. Hearing they would have a 3rd daughter deeply disappointed him and seemed to affect him in ways that no one could have foreseen. Despite this hidden tension, there were no visible signs that Drew was capable of violence. He had no criminal record, history of domestic abuse, or encounters with law enforcement. To their neighbors, their family was an ordinary family, adapting to life in a small town. Samantha, although noticing subtle changes in Drew's behavior, remained focused on her family and the upcoming birth of their third daughter in February 2025. She also looked forward to celebrating her 30th birthday, just 2 weeks away. Life in their family household carried on as usual during late summer and early fall of 2024. Adelina and Izzy, the daughters, went to school each day. Samantha managed the house while preparing for the new baby, and Drew went to work. Anyone observing the family would have seen a picture of normalcy, but underneath, Drew's disappointment about the baby's gender was quietly festering. With no outward signs of trouble, no calls to the police or family interventions, no one could have predicted the tragedy that was about to unfold. Those who later tried to understand Drew's actions were baffled. On the surface, he seemed to have everything: a loving wife, 2 healthy daughters, steady employment, and another child on the way. Samantha had built a life filled with love and stability for their family, but for reasons no one could fathom, the good things in Drew's life became a source of anger. On the night of Wednesday, September 4th, 2024, just days after Labor Day, their household appeared to be winding down from a normal day. Adelina and Izzy were likely getting ready for bed, and Samantha, 5 months pregnant, was caring for her daughters and preparing for the evening. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, but beneath the surface, Drew's frustrations had reached their breaking point. At around 11:29 p.m., the quiet town of Masonville was jolted by an emergency that shocked the entire community. Drew called 911 to report what he described as a domestic dispute at their family home. To the dispatcher, Drew sounded like a man trying to help his wife. He claimed Samantha had been injured and that he was applying pressure to her wounds to stop the bleeding. However, when police arrived at the scene, they discovered a horrifying scene that was completely opposite to what Drew described, permanently shattering the image of a peaceful family. New York State Police troopers Corey King and Ronald King were dispatched to respond to an emergency call. When the troopers arrived at the mobile home with its covered porch, they were prepared to assist what they believed was an injured woman. Instead, they were confronted with an unthinkable scene. As they approached, Drew briefly stuck his head out the front door before quickly retreating inside. His suspicious behavior immediately alerted the troopers that something was wrong. Shortly after, a single gunshot echoed from inside the house, sending shockwaves through the officers. They quickly retreated to the end of the driveway and called for backup from a Delaware County Sheriff's deputy, using the deputy's patrol car as cover. The officers cautiously approached the house again. Suddenly, Adelina, a 9-year-old girl, emerged from the home, running toward the police with her clothes soaked in blood. The officers' hearts sank as they realized this child had witnessed unimaginable violence. Through tears, Adelina told the officers that her mother had been stabbed and that her father, Drew, was still inside the house with a gun. As they worked to protect Adelina, her 6-year-old sibling, Izzy, also ran out, similarly covered in blood. Both sisters were deeply affected by the horrific events that had just occurred. Despite being injured and in shock, they still tried to talk to the police. The officers provided first aid to the children and called for additional medical assistance. It was clear that both girls had endured a horrific ordeal. Once they were safely transported to receive medical care, the focus turned back to Drew inside the house. The officers called out for him to surrender, and to their surprise, he walked out of the home with his hands raised. Drew was immediately arrested without resistance. The officers noted he was covered in blood and had cuts on his hands. During his arrest, police found a butter knife in his pocket, a chilling piece of evidence that would later shed light on the brutal events of that night. Inside the house, the officers found Samantha lying on her side, critically injured with multiple stab wounds. Despite their efforts to provide life-saving aid, it was clear her injuries were severe. Emergency medical personnel arrived, and Samantha was airlifted to Wilson Medical Center in Johnson City. Both daughters, Izzy and Adelina, were flown to Upstate Medical Center in Syracuse as well, due to the severity of their injuries. Investigators later determined that all three victims had been subjected to a prolonged and brutal attack. Tragically, Samantha succumbed to her injuries and was pronounced dead at the hospital. She was only 29 years old and just 2 weeks away from her 30th birthday. Her unborn daughter, whom she had been 5 months pregnant with, also did not survive. Adelina and Izzy remained hospitalized in serious condition but were expected to recover physically. However, the emotional trauma they endured would require extensive therapy and support for years. Drew was transported to A.O. Fox Hospital for treatment of superficial self-inflicted wounds. After receiving care, he was processed at the New York State Police Barracks in Sydney. He was charged and faced full legal accountability for the horrific attack. The investigation that followed was detailed and exhaustive, led by New York State Police, with support from the Delaware County Sheriff's Office and local law enforcement agencies. Major Lucas Shooter, commander of Troop C, held a press conference on September 6, 2024, to provide new information regarding the arrest and charges in the case. What made this case particularly unsettling for investigators was that it marked the first time the state police had been called to Samantha and Drew's residence for a domestic issue. There were no prior reports, no history of domestic violence, and no indication that Drew was capable of such violence toward his own family. As the investigation progressed, police discovered additional alarming evidence. A search of the property revealed that Drew owned multiple firearms and 2 high-capacity ammunition-feeding devices. These findings led to weapons-related charges being added to the list of crimes he faced. On September 5, 2024, Drew Garnier was officially charged with second-degree murder and 2 counts of attempted second-degree murder. He was arraigned at Delhi Town Court and sent to the Delaware County Jail without bail. Recognizing the gravity of the case, Delaware County District Attorney Shah Smith quickly convened an emergency grand jury session. On September 11, 2024, the grand jury issued an 8-count indictment against Drew. In addition to the original charges, the indictment included weapons violations, second-degree murder, 2 counts of attempted murder, criminal use of a firearm, and multiple counts of illegal weapon possession. Drew pleaded not guilty to all charges at his arraignment before Delaware County Court. Judge John L. Hubbard, who ordered him to remain in the custody of the Delaware County Sheriff's Office without bail. If convicted on all charges, Drew faced a potential sentence of 25 years to life in prison. However, as the case advanced, it became evident that going to trial would force his daughters, Adelina and Izzy, to relive the trauma of that horrific night by testifying. To prevent further emotional harm to the girls, prosecutors opted for a negotiated plea deal. On March 25, 2025, Drew pleaded guilty to reduced charges of first-degree manslaughter and 2 counts of first-degree assault in exchange for a total sentence of 30 years in state prison, followed by 15 years of post-release supervision. District Attorney Smith explained that, although the sentence was lower than the maximum possible sentence, the agreement was in the best interests of Izzy and Adelina. The sentencing hearing took place on May 13, 2025, in Delaware County Court. The courtroom was filled with family members, community members, and court officials. During the hearing, only one victim impact statement was read, that of Samantha's father, Gregory Vernagallo. He provided critical insight into what had driven the crime. Gregory informed the court that Drew had wanted a boy and became furious when he found out Samantha was pregnant with their 3rd daughter. He explained that this shocking revelation, that gender disappointment had motivated such horrific violence, had added a deeply disturbing dimension to an already tragic case. He also shared that he had adopted his 2 granddaughters and devoted his life to raising them, stating that he was their father now and would protect them. He added that he hadn't left their sides since the attack. When given the chance to speak, Drew addressed the court with apparent remorse and expressed his regret to his in-laws, especially his children. He also expressed hope that someday he could make amends with his kids. He said he would not force anything on them and respected their decisions, but added that if they ever wanted to see him, he hoped he would be allowed to be there for them. Public defender Joseph Hermedi emphasized the lack of logic behind the crime, stating that his client, Drew, had no explanation for what had happened. Joseph described the situation as extremely tragic and mentioned that he didn't believe anyone would disagree with that assessment. Judge John L. Hubbard considered Drew's clean record before sentencing him. The judge said Drew had taken the life of his wife and harmed his children, who were entitled to his protection, and sentenced him to 30 years in prison. During the hearing, Drew asked for permission to continue contact with his daughters, Izzy and Adelina, while incarcerated. Delaware County District Attorney Shah Smith strongly opposed the request, urging the court to impose the longest possible no-contact orders. Judge John agreed and issued stay-away orders for both Izzy and Adelina until 2056, which is 8 years beyond Drew's maximum potential release date. The judge added that if the daughters ever wished to contact their father, they could petition the court to revise the protective orders. Drew refused to sign the court orders, but they were served to him in court regardless. His refusal was seen as further resistance to accepting responsibility for his actions against his children. This heartbreaking case has had devastating consequences for all involved. Samantha and Drew's 2 daughters, Adelina and Izzy, are now orphans because of their father's actions. The girls are now legally adopted by their grandfather Gregory and have moved to a new home to settle down and receive better care. A GoFundMe campaign organized by Aaron Leahy from Center raised over $16,000 to support Izzy and Adelina. The campaign described Samantha, the girl's mother, as compassionate and loving. It revealed that Samantha was pregnant with a baby girl due in February 2025 and was just weeks away from celebrating her 30th birthday when her life was tragically cut short. The crime shocked the residents of Masonville, a small, peaceful community where such acts of violence are extremely rare. District Attorney Sean Smith commended law enforcement for their diligent investigation and dedication. He mentioned that what made the case especially chilling was the lack of any warning signs that could have foreshadowed such violence. Drew Garnier had no prior criminal record, mental health issues, or prior interactions with law enforcement. The revelation that gender disappointment over an unborn child could escalate to the murder of a pregnant wife and an attack on his daughters serves as a sobering reminder of how domestic violence can erupt without any prior indications. Nanette Krenle grew up in New Orleans in a humble, close-knit family. Her parents, Dan and Pat Watson, raised her along with her siblings Kim, Eliza, and 3 half-siblings and taught her important values of loyalty and kindness, known for her gentle and caring nature. Nanette had a deep love for animals and shared her home with 2 cats and a dog. Despite moving away, she maintained a close bond with her family, especially her father and sisters, speaking with them daily. In 1994, at 27 years old, Nanette met Steve Krenle while applying for a job at his office supply store. Steve, then 28, owned both a scuba gear business and the store, and was going through a divorce at the time. Their professional relationship soon turned romantic, and after Steve finalized his divorce, he introduced Nanette to his young son, Justin. By 1995, they were married. Steve's native of Louisiana. He grew up near Lacombe and reportedly had a tense relationship with his brother, Brian. In 2000, Steve and Nanette moved to Lacombe, closer to his parents. He gradually worked his way up in the Tammany Parish Fire Department, eventually becoming the fire chief. Respected for his professionalism, his career in the fire department provided him with financial security and influence in the community. In 1997, after Steve sold both of his businesses, Nanette shifted her career path. She began working at a daycare center, where her kind and attentive nature earned the trust of parents and co-workers. Beyond her job, she became involved in the community, organizing fundraisers and charitable events, as well as supporting local fire departments by selling handmade ceramics and baked goods. By 2017, she had been out of the workforce for several years, focusing instead on her home, her pets, and continued community involvement. Although she had no children, Nanette was always concerned and attentive to the lives of her loved ones. She often played a central role in family matters, offering emotional and financial support to her loved ones. To outsiders, she and Steve seemed to lead a peaceful life, residing on 100 acres of scenic remote property in Lacombe. However, behind closed doors, Nanette grew increasingly concerned for her safety after Steve's brother, Brian, was released from prison. Brian allegedly blamed Nanette for the legal issues that led to his incarceration and had made direct threats against her. In response, she urged for additional security measures, having cameras installed around the property and keeping protective tools in her bedroom, car, and purse. She openly shared her fears with her family. Her father and sisters, aware of the escalating tension, were alarmed but did not anticipate just how grave the situation would become. Steve was also concerned and worked with Nanette to increase security. He installed additional cameras, purchased self-defense equipment, and even practiced shooting with her at a local shooting range. However, despite these precautions, the simmering problems in their family did not go away. Behind the facade of a peaceful life, there were bitter family conflicts, growing tensions, and the choices ahead led to unforeseen consequences. On July 14, 2017, at around 2:30 p.m., the St. Tammany Parish Fire Department received an urgent call from Steve's cousin, who lived nearby. He reported seeing thick smoke rising from Steve's property and suspected the house was on fire. Despite the distance between their homes and the dense forest in between, the fire was visible from afar. Steve and his team arrived at the scene around 3 p.m. when the house was engulfed in flames. Firefighters worked into the evening to extinguish the fire, only to discover human remains in the bathroom of the master bedroom. The damage was extensive, but the location of the remains and the fact that no one else lived there indicated the victim was likely Nanette, Steve's wife. No alarms had sounded, and throughout the day, Steve's repeated calls to both Nanette's cell phone and the house landline had gone unanswered. Her car remained in the garage, further confirming she had been home at the time of the fire. Tragically, all the household pets also perished, reflecting the sudden and intense nature of the flames. Federal fire investigation specialists joined the inquiry. Initially, the fire was considered a possible accident, but the circumstances surrounding Nanette's death raised suspicions. Her remains were found in the bathroom, and there was no indication she had tried to escape. This prompted a forensic autopsy, which included DNA testing and an investigation into the cause of death. About a week later, during a memorial service, part of the coroner's preliminary findings became public. It was revealed that Nanette had suffered a gunshot wound to the head, with a bullet found in her skull. This discovery completely shifted the direction of the investigation. On July 18th, the sheriff confirmed the findings, apologized for the delay in communication, and acknowledged evidence of a criminal act. Further autopsy results showed no smoke inhalation in Nanette's lungs, proving that she had died before the fire. Since no weapon was found near her body, the possibility of self-inflicted injuries has been ruled out. The investigation further revealed the presence of 9 security cameras on the property, but Steve stated that the system had stopped functioning several days before the fire. Efforts to recover footage from the damaged equipment were unsuccessful. This lack of evidence, combined with forensic findings, suggested the fire had been intentionally set to destroy evidence. Investigators shifted their focus to individuals who might have had both motive and access to the property. However, an official statement confirming foul play in Nanette's death was not released until 4 days after the fire. The family's frustration with the investigation grew, particularly because the coroner had noted the gunshot wound the day after the incident, yet this information wasn't immediately shared with them. Nanette's sister, Kim, a prosecutor in Nebraska, publicly criticized the investigation, pointing to the lack of proper scene containment, which may have compromised evidence. When Nanette's relatives arrived in Louisiana shortly after the tragedy, they found the property unsecured and the house open. Within 2 days, Steve was allowed to return to the site, raising concerns about evidence being altered or lost. It wasn't until Steve's son, Justin, discovered a fragment of a human skull in the debris that authorities finally secured the scene. The incident has left the public losing confidence in Sheriff Randy Smith's department. While federal investigators conduct an independent analysis, they discovered multiple points of ignition and traces of accelerants, confirming the fire was deliberately set. Despite these findings, however, the sheriff did not rule out the possibility that Julie harmed herself, citing the lack of a recovered weapon and inconclusive ballistics test results. Later, 2 firearms were found in the remains of the home, but neither could be definitively linked to the fatal shot. The bullet recovered from Nanette's skull was too damaged for reliable analysis. Additional forensic tests reinforced previous findings, including finding no smoke in Nanette's lungs and no food in her stomach. Despite her having been seen purchasing food at a fast food restaurant that morning, additional inconsistencies came to light during the investigation. There was no blood on Nanette's gunshot wound to the head, as is often the case, leading to speculation that her body may have been moved after her death. An independent expert suggested that whoever moved her was likely familiar with the layout of the house. The sheriff, however, publicly disputed the forensic expert's conclusions. This discrepancy with the findings of federal agents further undermined public confidence in the investigation. Nanette's family began openly questioning the integrity of local authorities and raised concerns about potential conflicts of interest. As discrepancies mounted, the sheriff was eventually compelled to issue a public statement, acknowledging that Nanette's death resulted from a violent act. Despite this admission, the investigation failed to identify the person responsible. The case shifted towards exploring possible motives and suspects with access to the property. Nanette's husband, Steve, was naturally a key subject of interest due to his unrestricted access to the house. He willingly cooperated, volunteered for a polygraph test, and passed. However, since polygraph results are not entirely reliable, investigators didn't eliminate him as a suspect. Steve's alibi was backed by fire department security footage confirming he was at work on the day of the incident, starting at 8 a.m., and didn't leave at any point, including during lunch. This was corroborated by surveillance footage and his co-workers' testimonies. However, it was noted that Steve, working on a Friday, was unusual, as he usually took that day off. Investigators also analyzed Nanette's movements on the morning of July 14th. Traffic cameras spotted her driving between her home and a nearby fast food restaurant, where her bank card was used to buy food. Her car was later seen near her house. About an hour later, a phone call was made from Nanette's phone to an unfamiliar number. The person on the other end claimed not to know her, and the reason for the call remains unexplained. Investigators explored potential personal conflicts and discovered that Steve had been in an extramarital relationship with a colleague. Nanette was aware of the affair and had told others she was considering divorce, which under state law would involve dividing their shared assets, an arrangement that could have been financially disadvantageous for Steve. When questioned, Steve admitted to the affair but claimed the couple had reconciled and planned to stay together. Close family members were also questioned. Steve's son, Justin, had reportedly experienced tension with his stepmother, Julie. In the past, family acquaintances described him as having unusual interests, including a fascination with firearms. However, Justin provided documentation proving he was out of state for work on the day of the incident, which was verified, ruling him out as a suspect. Investigators also looked into Steve's brother, Brian, who had a criminal record and a history of family conflicts. Over the years, Nanette had voiced concerns about his behavior. Shortly after his release from prison, she sent her sister a message describing a specific threat from him, in which he allegedly displayed aggressiveness and hinted at setting the house on fire. These claims were corroborated through their text exchanges. Surveillance footage from their parents' home showed Brian did not leave the premises on the day of Nanette's death. However, a wearable tracking device issued to him malfunctioned and failed to record any location data that day, with the cause of this failure unexplained. Another puzzling incident occurred a month before Nanette's death. A security camera recorded an unidentified man near the entrance gate of the property. He left behind a cigarette butt and a knife. Nanette informed her father about the incident, but the man's identity remained unclear and no investigation was conducted to find out more. After investigating multiple leads, the case remained unsolved. Every suspect either had a confirmed alibi or there wasn't enough evidence to make a formal accusation, leaving the investigation at a dead end. 2 months after Nanette's death, the sheriff made another public announcement. He declared that Steve was no longer a person of interest in the case, explaining that Steve's alibi had been verified. There was no clear motive, and the evidence was deemed insufficient to move forward. However, Nanette's family felt this announcement was premature, as not all digital records had been reviewed. Several witnesses had yet to be re-interviewed, and a detailed timeline of her phone activity leading up to her death was still incomplete. It appeared the investigation was entering a state of stagnation. When Nanette's family requested access to the case documents, their attempts were met with vague responses. Louisiana state law restricts access to investigative materials to the closest next of kin, which in this case was Steve, not Nanette's parents or sisters. Steve did not share these documents with the rest of the family. In search of answers, Nanette's relatives turned to private attorneys and independent forensic experts. One expert, after examining the available evidence, identified signs of deliberate investigative mismanagement, noting that critical protocols for handling cases involving violent deaths and burnt evidence had been disregarded. The conclusions and methodologies of the private experts sharply contrasted with those of the local authorities. Efforts to transfer the case to a different jurisdiction proved unsuccessful. Appeals to the district attorney's office were dismissed, with officials citing a lack of legal justification to relocate the investigation. Frustrated by the lack of progress, Nanette's family turned to social media, launching a page to provide updates and highlight inconsistencies in the investigation, in the hope of pressuring authorities into action. However, the sheriff's actions became a significant obstacle to achieving transparency. His public statements, dismissal of expert findings, and personal connections to individuals potentially linked to the case raised concerns about his impartiality and deepened public mistrust. Despite multiple individuals with potential motives, the investigation failed to reach a definite conclusion. Detectives worked on verifying alibis, analyzing technical records, and identifying gaps in the official narrative. But these efforts often revealed inconsistencies that undermined the credibility of the evidence. A key issue was the absence of location data from the Jeep's-enabled ankle monitor worn by Brian. On July 14th, the day of the incident, the monitor registered no location data, an unexplained blackout. Authorities were unable to determine whether the failure was a technical error or whether the monitor had been intentionally disabled. This missing data represented a major accountability failure and raised serious questions. Another troubling discovery came from a review of footage from a security camera inside Brian's parents' home. The video depicted Brian with a working desk lamp and a visible wall clock in the background, ostensibly providing an alibi. However, Nanette's family questioned the authenticity of this footage, suggesting it could have been pre-recorded or staged. Experts also observed that the angle and focus of the camera appeared unusual for a standard household surveillance setup. Additional uncertainty arose with surveillance footage from a fast food establishment showing Nanette's vehicle. Investigators assumed she was driving the car that morning, but the video quality was too poor to verify her identity. This assumption was based solely on her bank card being used to make a purchase nearby. The situation was further complicated by the fact that there was no footage from her home surveillance system on the day of the incident. Steve claimed the cameras had not been operational at the time, but investigators later found traces of accelerant on the damaged equipment. Experts concluded that the security system had likely been intentionally tampered with before the fire, suggesting someone with knowledge of the camera's locations and purpose had interfered. After Nanette's father passed away, her sisters took the lead in demanding a proper investigation. They launched an online awareness campaign, collaborated with advocacy groups, and participated in discussions on crime-focused platforms. The family repeatedly urged state authorities to transfer the case to an independent investigative body, but their requests were consistently met with generic responses that lacked meaningful action. They were also frustrated by the investigators' failure to review footage from the citywide surveillance system, which could have offered critical context. These shortcomings formed the basis of formal complaints to the district attorney's office. Although officials promised to keep the case open, there was no evidence of real progress, receiving minimal support from local law enforcement. Nanette's family shifted their focus to building a network of allies. They connected with organizations specializing in unresolved cases, which led to increased attention on Nanette's death through podcasts, videos, and media coverage. By 2024, the case remained unsolved. However, new hope appeared when Colin Sims was elected district attorney. Colin publicly expressed his willingness to review the evidence, marking the first sign of possible investigative progress after nearly 7 years of inaction. As of March 2024, Nanette's case was still open, with no charges filed against any suspects. Despite coroner findings, witness testimonies, and independent assessments, authorities in St. Tammany Parish had yet to identify any responsible parties. What initially seemed like a straightforward case had instead devolved into a prolonged stalemate. By mid-2025, the case records were still sealed, and only individuals with legal standing, such as Nanette's husband, Steve, were granted access. The family remained barred from reviewing complete investigative reports, transcripts, or relevant surveillance data. Repeated appeals to state authorities went unanswered. In response, a grassroots group formed by Nanette's friends and family continued to provide social media updates, urging the public to come forward with any useful information. The family also sought assistance from federal agencies like the Department of Justice. In their letters, they raised concerns about potential conflicts of interest involving local authorities and petitioned for the case to be transferred to a higher jurisdiction. Independent experts consulted by the family identified numerous investigative avenues that had not been fully explored, including recovering deleted digital records and re-interviewing key witnesses. However, without official investigative authority, these proposals could not be enforced. Despite years of stagnation, Nanette's family has never stopped fighting for answers. For them, this is about more than personal grief. It is a pursuit of justice. The lack of progress has only strengthened their resolve. They firmly believe the truth can still be uncovered if independent expertise is brought in and the case is reviewed impartially. As of this report, the case remains open but inactive. Nanette Krenle's story highlights how errors, delays, and possible bias can obstruct justice in a major case. Yet, it also demonstrates the unwavering resilience of a family determined to keep her memory alive. Their goal remains unchanged: to uncover the truth, no matter how much time has passed or how many obstacles stand in their way. A loud argument broke out in a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of town. Neighbors were used to the screams coming from the house, but tonight it was different. The sounds of screaming, banging, and muffled sobbing grew louder, as if signaling something was about to go too far. Then, just a few minutes later, a call came through the emergency line. The voice on the other end was shaky and broken, as if the caller was in a state of confusion and despair. It was the beginning of one of the most controversial cases the town of Dubuke had ever seen. Dubuke, a city stretched along the banks of the Mississippi River, at first glance looks like a classic Midwestern town with rolling hills, historic districts, and postcard charm. But beneath that surface lies a complicated history. For decades, Dubuque was known as a stronghold of a notorious hate group with deep roots in the region. In the 1922, the group was highly influential, organizing rallies, pressuring local officials, and gaining open support from many white residents. This troubling legacy left scars on the city's social fabric. Entire neighborhoods were divided along racial lines. African American families were pushed into specific areas, and for years, schools and jobs remained largely inaccessible to minorities. Even into the late 20th century, federal reports listed Dubuque as one of the least welcoming places in the country for Black Americans. During the 1982 and 1990s, tensions flared again. Threatening graffiti appeared, homes were targeted with arson, and city leaders were forced to roll out anti-discrimination programs. Still, even in the 21st century, hostility lingered. From street-level aggression to inflammatory posts online, the contrast between Dubuque's picturesque image and its deeper social struggles has always been striking. On one side, historic churches, a respected university, and breathtaking views of the Mississippi. On the other, a legacy of racial intolerance, social friction, and long-standing mistrust between communities. It was in this atmosphere of prejudice and unspoken conflict that a story unfolded, one that would soon draw national attention. Pirllo grew up in Dubuque in a well-regarded family, was known from a young age for his love of sports and natural social charisma. His confidence and charm made him a popular figure among his friends throughout high school and into college. Samantha Link's story was different. Raised in a household that valued hard work, discipline, she turned to athletics early on, pushing herself to prove her strength and determination. In her teens, she was diagnosed with mental health conditions that required ongoing medical supervision and daily medication. While the treatments helped her maintain balance, they also caused mood swings, occasional irritability. She had also endured difficult past relationships, marked by control and emotional pressure. That history left deep scars, a fear of losing control, a constant need for reassurance. Outwardly, though, Samantha appeared energetic, someone with clear goals and the willpower to chase them. They first met at a party hosted by their mutual friend Cassie. The night was filled with music and laughter, a seemingly ordinary gathering that turned into a pivotal moment. Fonte was in his element, cracking jokes, drawing people in with his charm. Samantha watched him with a mix of caution and curiosity. When they finally spoke, it quickly became clear they shared similar interests and values. It was obvious something was sparking between them. Within days, casual texts and evening walks blossomed into something more serious. Before long, they decided to move in together. Their friends were surprised at how quickly things escalated. It was as if they had skipped the getting-to-know-you stage entirely and jumped straight into a full-blown commitment. But under one roof, their differences became hard to ignore. Samantha craved stability and a calm home environment where her emotional well-being was prioritized. Fonte, however, clung to his familiar lifestyle, late nights, parties, and constant outings with friends. What felt like neglect to her seemed completely normal to him. Initially, their differences seemed like complementary opposites, creating a fragile sense of balance. However, as time passed, their different needs created problems in the relationship. Their contrasting ideas about what a partnership meant slowly damaged their connection. To outsiders, they still looked like the picture-perfect couple. Fonte, the charismatic figure who drew attention everywhere he went, and Samantha, the quiet, grounding presence at his side. But those closer to them began to notice early red flags. Samantha grew increasingly uneasy about Fonte's openness with other women. He, in turn, brushed off her concerns with laughter, dismissing them as jealousy, which only deepened her distrust. On the surface, their relationship remained intact. They still talked about the future, stood by each other during difficult times, and tried to maintain closeness. But beneath that facade, tension was quietly building. For Samantha, being with Fonte meant a chance at stability, a reliable partner she could depend on. For him, it was more about excitement, attention, and connection. These mismatched intentions became increasingly obvious to those around them. The strain soon began to take its toll. Samantha's life was tightly bound to her medication schedule and regular medical checkups. But Fonte didn't always take this seriously. He believed his role was to support her during the hard moments, but not to structure his entire life around her needs. Minor frustrations began to stack up. His tardiness, broken promises, and carefree acceptance of party invitations even when she wasn't feeling well. Her sharp reactions often sounded to him like relentless criticism, which he dismissed as overdramatic. She asked more frequently about their future, hoping for reassurance. While he deflected, unwilling to commit to specifics, her anxiety grew, and with it, his irritation. Still, the bond between them didn't disappear. This push and pull, deep attachment, mixed with rising frustration, became the defining pattern of their relationship. After yet another heated argument, Samantha left to stay with her mother, hoping distance would give her clarity. Eventually, though, they agreed to return home together. The car ride back was suffocating, long stretches of silence broken by bursts of blame. Neither wanted to be the first to back down. For Fonte, this reconciliation felt like a crossroads. He was beginning to realize the relationship had reached its breaking point. Samantha, on the other hand, couldn't hide her anger and pressed him relentlessly, escalating every conversation. Back at the house, peace was short-lived. Within hours, another argument erupted. Samantha demanded proof of his commitment, pleading for reassurance that he was serious about a long-term future. Fonte answered with cold detachment, saying her expectations were unrealistic and that he felt trapped by her demands. Soon after, he made a decision. Ending the relationship was, in his mind, the only way to escape the emotional weight pressing down on him. He told her directly he no longer saw a future for them. For Samantha, the breakup was devastating. She had built her stability around him and wasn't ready to let go. As emotions spiraled, a new blow landed. A video posted by Fonte, speaking directly to his audience. He made remarks that could easily be interpreted as thinly veiled references to their problems. To Samantha, it felt like mockery, his way of dismissing her and airing their struggles in public. For her, it was undeniable proof he had no intention of reconciling. What began as emotional strain quickly escalated into confrontation. During one heated dispute, Fonte reportedly told Samantha he wanted her out of the house, that her presence had become unbearable. This wasn't just a moment of anger. That moment marked a critical tipping point. With his video circulating and their fights intensifying, the fragile balance between them was about to shatter. Later, Fonte claimed that after their heated argument, Samantha, overwhelmed and emotionally unstable, impulsively grabbed a kitchen knife and injured herself. He insisted it was an act of self-harm, not violence from him. According to his account, he even tried to stop her but failed. But the scene first responders encountered told a very different story. Paramedics arrived to find Samantha lifeless on the kitchen floor, bearing 3 stab wounds to vital areas. The placement of her body and the nature of the wounds simply did not align with Fonte's version. While medics worked desperately to save her, officers observed Fonte closely. What they saw was not shock or grief, but hostility. Witnesses later recalled him shouting at police, arguing with them, and displaying aggressive, confrontational behavior. To officers, it was a clear signal this was no mere domestic dispute. It was something far more serious. Once in custody, Fonte's statements immediately raised red flags. When pressed for details about the timing of events and his exact actions, his answers were vague, inconsistent, and often shifted under scrutiny. Detectives quickly suspected he was concealing the truth. Then came the most damning discovery: his phone. A recording captured just before the incident revealed a tense atmosphere filled with threats and aggression from Fonte. Far from calm or composed, his voice dripped with hostility. The tone of the video stood in stark contrast to his claim that he had only tried to protect Samantha, shredding his credibility. Text messages recovered from the device added another layer. They showed days of heated arguments, accusations, and emotional tension. The incident was clearly the culmination of ongoing turmoil. Medical examiners reinforced this conclusion. They determined Samantha's injuries were consistent with a violent struggle, not self-inflicted wounds. The angle, depth, and force of the stabs made the prospect of self-harm virtually impossible. Investigators gathered more evidence from neighbors and nearby security cameras. Multiple residents reported hearing terrified screams that night. Every new piece of testimony pointed away from self-harm and toward a brutal confrontation. Fonte's explanation now looked less like truth and more like a hastily constructed defense. From the very beginning, Samantha's family had voiced their doubts. They told investigators she had never expressed self-harm thoughts and was focused on her future. Her mother, especially, emphasized that Samantha had plans, goals, and no history of impulsive self-harm. Their testimony directly contradicted Fonte's attempt to paint her as unstable. As the investigation deepened, public reaction intensified. Local media covered the story closely, and on social media, outrage spread rapidly. Many in the community saw Fonte's narrative as a desperate attempt to deflect blame. For Samantha's loved ones, it was not just about disproving his claims, it was about demanding justice. What began as a domestic dispute had now escalated into one of the most scrutinized criminal cases in the area. Each revelation fueled public anger and strengthened the resolve of Samantha's family, ensuring the case would not fade quietly, but remain a test of truth, justice, and accountability. A series of meticulous forensic examinations were commissioned in an effort to clarify the circumstances of the tragedy. Medical specialists carefully assessed the wounds sustained by Samantha Link, noting striking details. The injuries varied in depth, direction, and force, suggesting multiple blows delivered during a struggle. Psychological evaluations added further weight to the findings. Records showed that Samantha had never been diagnosed with a serious mental disorder, nor was she under ongoing psychiatric observation. There was no documented history of instability that could support the claim she had acted in a sudden breakdown. These conclusions marked a turning point in the investigation. Combined with the digital evidence and testimony from friends and neighbors, they dismantled the defense's early narrative. The consensus among experts was unequivocal. The theory that Samantha harmed herself was implausible. For prosecutors, it was the foundation they needed to push the case toward trial with renewed confidence. When the trial of Fonte Buello commenced in Rockwell County, Texas, anticipation was high. Locals were unfamiliar with such a sensational case. The court was packed with onlookers, reporters, and local residents eager to witness the proceedings. The judge presided, a figure known for his rigid style and no-nonsense rulings. His choice to restrict discussion about Samantha's prior psychological consultations sparked immediate debate. By prohibiting references to her visits with mental health professionals, he effectively blocked the jury from hearing evidence that might have offered a fuller understanding of her emotional state. Many legal observers criticized the ruling as a limitation that tilted the balance of the case. In the courtroom, the prosecution leaned heavily on science. They highlighted bruises on Samantha's arms and shoulders, injuries that clearly pointed to restraint or physical conflict rather than voluntary harm. Crime scene photographs revealed a kitchen in disarray, with blood patterns that supported the scenario of a violent struggle. These details left jurors with a vivid image of the chaos that had unfolded. The defense countered with a familiar strategy, portraying Fonte as a man trapped in an escalating situation. They argued he had acted in self-defense after Samantha lashed out during an emotional outburst. Text messages were presented as evidence of her volatility. But those arguments were steadily eroded by witnesses who painted a different picture. Samantha's friends testified she was looking ahead, discussing a new job opportunity and planning an upcoming trip. Evidence that directly contradicted claims she was unstable or preparing to harm herself. The most dramatic moment came when prosecutors played an audio recording recovered from Fonte's phone. His voice could be heard, sharp and cutting. To the prosecution, this was the sound of frustration boiling over, a precursor to violence. The defense tried to minimize its significance, calling it a casual remark taken out of context. However, both the jury and the public seemed to interpret the recording as part of a larger pattern of tension and conflict. Meanwhile, Fonte's conduct on the stand left jurors uneasy. He stumbled over timelines, contradicted earlier statements, and often refused to give direct answers. Each inconsistency further damaged his credibility, reinforcing the prosecution's portrait of a man trying to obscure the truth rather than reveal it. As proceedings dragged on, the divide between prosecution and defense sharpened. One side presented a case built on consistency, expert testimony, and hard evidence. The other leaned on speculation and selective interpretation. But the most decisive battles took place behind closed doors. Jury deliberations quickly grew heated, with members split between doubt and certainty. Some pressed for conviction, citing the overwhelming medical evidence, while others hesitated, swayed by lingering questions. Reports later surfaced of intense internal pressure. A letter written by juror admitted he felt coerced not only by more assertive jurors, but also by the judge, who repeatedly urged them to reach consensus rather than deadlock. The judge's role itself became a focal point. Far from remaining neutral, he was seen pushing the jury toward unity, interrupting defense attorneys, and shutting down lines of questioning that might have benefited Fonte. Journalists covering the trial described a courtroom where judicial authority sometimes overshadowed fairness, creating an imbalance that would later resurface during appeals. The public's interest in the case intensified outside the courthouse. Samantha's family spoke often to the media, portraying her as a victim of manipulation and violence, and Fonte as the perpetrator. Local newspapers published emotional stories about Samantha's last days, with quotes from friends, family highlighting her kindness and strength. A critical moment arrived when previously undisclosed messages from Samantha's personal conversations were introduced in court. These texts revealed her intention to leave the relationship and focus on building a new future for herself. For prosecutors, it was devastating to the defense's claims. Any suggestion that she was unstable or incapable of making decisions collapsed under the weight of her own words. The jury was no longer weighing competing versions of events. They were already considering the severity of the punishment. Internal pressure within the jury room and the judge's firm stance had shifted the momentum firmly toward the prosecution. After weeks of testimony, forensic evidence, and conflicting legal arguments, the courtroom braced for the final moment. The atmosphere was tense enough to silence the crowd. The judge read the verdict aloud. Pirllo was found guilty of the charges against Samantha Link and sentenced to 50 years in prison. A heavy silence filled the room, followed by a wave of mixed reactions. Pirllo didn't outwardly panic upon hearing the sentence, but the strain on his face was unmistakable. He had denied responsibility throughout the trial, and even in the face of the final ruling, he continued to maintain his innocence. His immediate response was to announce plans to appeal the decision, claiming that the evidence had been misinterpreted and that the full context of that night had not been fairly considered. Samantha's family was visibly relieved by the verdict. They felt justice had been served, though they still grieved an irreplaceable loss. Family members in the courtroom cried openly, thanked the prosecutors and the court, expressing that the verdict brought them a long-awaited sense of closure. Public reaction, however, was far more divided. Many believed the sentence was just and reflected the strength of the evidence presented. Others questioned the fairness of the trial, arguing that media pressure and courtroom imbalances had stacked the odds against Pirllo from the beginning. His supporters pointed to specific grievances, such as the controversial removal of a juror and restrictions imposed on defense, claiming the process was tainted and should have been declared a mistrial. In the weeks following sentencing, the community itself split into camps. Some viewed Pirllo as a manipulative offender who had finally been held accountable. Others saw him as a man condemned by a system, eager for a conviction. Advocacy groups began forming, calling for a review of the case, while counter voices argued that the evidence was overwhelming and that reopening the matter would only prolong the suffering of Samantha's family. Rather than closing the book, the verdict ignited a fresh round of debate. To his critics, Pirllo embodied cold-blooded violence. To his supporters, he was another casualty of a flawed judicial system. His attorneys moved quickly, filing notices of appeal and alleging serious procedural missteps. They argued that video footage used in court had been stripped of context, twisting casual remarks into sinister threats. They also claimed investigators had targeted Pirllo as the prime suspect from the beginning, refusing to explore other possibilities. The appeals court agreed to review the case, but the process promised to be long and arduous. Meanwhile, Pirllo remained behind bars, his supporters organizing rallies and online campaigns in his name. To some, it was a fight for justice. To others, it was nothing more than a desperate attempt to rewrite a verdict that had already been decided. As preparations for the appeal advanced, the defense team brought in independent experts to bolster their version of events. Forensic psychologists and criminal investigators were introduced, some of whom argued that, under extreme emotional distress, the wounds on Samantha's body could be interpreted as self-inflicted. Another specialist pointed out that there were no direct eyewitnesses to the fatal altercation, suggesting the jury had relied heavily on circumstantial evidence. The prosecution quickly countered with its own battery of experts. They emphasized the directionality of blood spatter, the precise angles of the wounds, and the position of Samantha's body in the kitchen, all details that strongly indicated the injuries had been inflicted by someone else. Meanwhile, the media shifted its focus beyond the courtroom, digging into the couple's personal history. Old social media posts resurfaced. Friends and co-workers were interviewed, and new details began to circulate. Some accounts portrayed Samantha as someone who had voiced repeated concerns about Pirllo's temper and controlling behavior. Others painted a different picture, describing her as impulsive and occasionally volatile during moments of stress. The result was a battle of interpretations, not just between lawyers, but also among experts, journalists, and the public. Some professionals argued that the case had leaned too heavily on inference and lacked a definitive smoking gun. Others maintained that the convergence of evidence, from forensic findings to text messages, made the guilty verdict both justified and necessary. This division transformed the trial into more than just a legal proceeding. It became a cultural flashpoint. Talk shows debated it nightly, editorials dissected every new revelation, and online forums buzzed with arguments from both sides. By now, the case had transcended the courtroom. Investigative journalists kept the story alive with follow-up reports, some uncovering financial disputes related to Samantha's estate, others highlighting conflicts within her family. Social media intensified the polarization, with advocacy groups springing up in support of Fonte, convinced he was the victim of a miscarriage of justice, while opposing groups rallied to defend the verdict as a long-overdue act of accountability. In the end, the saga of Fonte and Samantha became more than the tragic story of two people. It stood as one of the most polarizing legal battles of its time, a case that revealed cracks in the justice system, stirred debates within professional circles, and split public opinion down the middle. Long after the courtroom lights dimmed, the case remained etched into collective memory, both as a cautionary tale and as a cultural mirror reflecting society's deepest divisions. On a quiet spring night in 2015, the town of Summerville, South Carolina, was shaken by a disappearance that would soon unravel into one of its darkest tragedies. Ashley Pegram, a 28-year-old single mother of three, disappeared after meeting a stranger online. This is not just the story of Ashley's final hours, it is a story of betrayal, of a family's desperate search for truth. It was spring 2015 in the quiet town of Summerville, near Charleston. Ashley, a hard-working single mom raising three young children, had connected with someone on the app Meet Me. They had also been messaging on Kik for about a month before deciding to meet in person. On the evening of the 3rd of April, 2015, around 9:30 p.m., Edward picked her up from her home in a Hyundai Sonata. The next morning, Ashley's family received a message claiming she had been dropped off at a gas station because she was too drunk. But that story didn't make sense. Ashley wasn't the type to disappear without checking in, especially with her kids waiting at home. Panicked, her family immediately reported her missing, leading to a community search and an urgent police investigation. To truly understand why Ashley's disappearance struck such a deep chord, we need to look at the woman behind the headlines. Ashley Pegram grew up in Summerville, South Carolina, in a close-knit family that valued togetherness. She shared a modest home with her mother and sister, Brandy Chance, sometimes even sharing one phone for the whole household. At just 28 years old, Ashley was already a devoted mother of three. Friends and family described her as a loving, playful parent, the kind of mum who turned chores into games and always put her kids first. But life hadn't been easy. Years earlier, the father of her sons had passed away, leaving her to grapple with grief. At times, she leaned on alcohol to cope with the pain, though her mother made sure those struggles never touched the children. That April evening, Ashley told her family she was heading out for a casual night, just a drink or two. She wore jeans, a gray sweater, and new shoes, keeping it simple. When Edward Bonilla, 30, the man she had been talking to, arrived in his Sonata, he didn't come to the door or introduce himself. He just waited in the car, which struck her family as odd. Still, Ashley got in, and the two drove off. They ended up at a bonfire hosted by Edward's brother. It was a casual gathering. People around a fire, others playing ping pong in the garage. Ashley seemed relaxed, chatting with people she'd never met before. One attendee later recalled that Ashley was friendly and easy to talk to. She had a couple of beers from the six-pack she'd brought, but showed no signs of intoxication. She was steady, engaged, and in control. By about 11:45 p.m., Edward decided it was time to leave. Ashley wasn't in a hurry. She still had beer left and seemed to want to stay, but he took the rest of her six-pack and ushered her out. Just after midnight on April 5th, they pulled into a gas station on College Park Road. Security cameras captured Ashley going inside at 12:04 a.m., using the restroom, and leaving at 12:11 a.m. She appeared fine, calm, and composed. She got back into the Sonata, and the two drove off together. After that, according to Edward's later account, things got heated in the car. He said Ashley started yelling, accusing him of stealing her mum's phone. Even though she hadn't taken the family phone with her that night, he claimed she became so upset that she wandered out near a mobile home park, which was only about 1.5 miles from her house. He said he let her out there to use the bathroom again and then drove off after the argument, assuming she would walk home, but as the hours passed and Ashley never returned, it became clear something far more sinister had happened that night. Ashley's house was silent that night. Her usual, "Mom, I'm home," never came. At 3:29 a.m., Edward sent a kick message to the family phone, saying he hoped Ashley was okay. He claimed he left her at a gas station because she was too drunk. However, this didn't match what others saw at the bonfire, where Ashley didn't seem very intoxicated. By morning on the 4th of April, the silence became unbearable. Ashley's mother noticed she hadn't returned, so she checked the phone and saw Edward's message. Her sister, Brandy, immediately began calling his number over and over. When Edward finally called back, his story shifted. Now he claimed he'd dropped Ashley near a mobile home park. That sudden change sent alarm bells ringing. Brandy and her mother rushed out, walking the dark roadside near the park, peering into ditches, terrified she might have fallen or been struck by a car. They found nothing. Still, Brandy couldn't shake the sinking feeling in her chest. As hours passed with no sign of Ashley, panic grew. The family reached out to friends, spreading word of her disappearance. Everyone knew Ashley would never abandon her children. By that evening, her mother called dispatch to file a missing persons report. She laid out the details of the date, the late-night messages, and just how out of character this was. With those early red flags, the Dorchester County Sheriff's Office quickly took action. Detective Sergeant Martin was assigned on the 7th of April, just days after Ashley was last seen. He started where most cases begin, with the people closest to her. Brandy recounted everything: the shared family phone Ashley had left behind, the 3:29 a.m. kick message, and Edward's inconsistent stories. Martin quickly saw that this wasn't a case of someone walking away from their life. Ashley had no history of disappearing. She was a devoted mother, with no enemies, no bitter disputes. Her world revolved around her kids. Friends and neighbors echoed the same picture. Ashley was lively, photogenic, the kind of person who lit up family gatherings. No one recalled seeing strange cars beyond Edward's Sonata that night, nor hearing arguments near the house. Still, some hinted at her vulnerability, saying grief sometimes led her into impulsive choices. One friend remembered Ashley was depressed, making poor decisions and things like that because of it. Neighbors joined the family in combing ditches and wooded lots, but the searches came up empty. Police pushed flyers, took in tips, and monitored social media, but no breakthrough came. Then came Edward. On the 8th of April, at 6:00 p.m., he walked into the sheriff's office for an interview. At first, he seemed cooperative. He outlined his story, picking Ashley up, going to the bonfire, her drinking, the stop at the gas station, the argument about a stolen phone, and finally dropping her near the mobile home park. He even pointed to a scuff mark on his car's front right quarter panel, claiming Ashley had kicked it in anger. But Martin's eyes caught a detail Edward didn't expect. The mark wasn't shaped like a normal kick. It was narrow at the bottom and wider at the top. Exactly the kind of impression you'd see if someone had been on their back. Kicking upward, Edward also slipped in small lies, like claiming he was unemployed due to an ankle injury. That raised even more suspicion. Investigators moved fast to test his story. They pulled security footage from the gas station on College Park Road. The video confirmed the timeline: the Sonata pulling in at 12:04 a.m. Ashley stepping out, calm and steady, using the restroom and getting back into the car at 12:11 p.m. She wasn't stumbling. She wasn't distressed. The footage shattered Edward's claim that she was too drunk to stand. Then, investigators turned their attention to the mobile home park. Edward swore he'd dropped Ashley there, but nearby surveillance told a different story. A garage at the intersection had cameras pointed directly at the road. When detectives reviewed the tapes, no Hyundai Sonata appeared during the time frame Edward described. His alibi collapsed on the spot. Why insist he'd been there if the cameras proved otherwise? Detectives circled back to the bonfire, re-interviewing attendees. Edward's brother's girlfriend, who had known the family for years, gave a clear impression. Ashley arrived around 9:30 p.m. Friendly, steady, and in no way stumbling drunk. In fact, Ashley wanted to stay longer, but Edward abruptly ended the night, even scooping up the beers she'd brought. Other guests echoed the same. Ashley was relaxed, social, enjoying herself. No aggression. This painted a starkly different picture from Edward's story of a drunk, unruly woman. Then came a breakthrough from an unexpected source. A tip from Edward's ex-girlfriend revealed he wasn't unemployed at all. He worked at cobble flooring and had access to company vans. When Detective Martin confronted him at the job site, Edward fumbled, claiming he had just started a few days ago. His boss quickly corrected him, saying Edward has been working there for 8 months. The lie raised even more questions. Why conceal his work? What was he hiding about those vans? Investigators acted fast. Edward's boss mentioned that he had seen Edward heading to the company van as if to retrieve something. Martin moved quickly, securing the Ford Econoline before Edward could touch it. Inside, the sight was chilling. Red stains streaked the walls, ceiling, and scattered items. A dented polyurethane missing its handle, tested positive for blood. Detectives collected Ashley's DNA standards, a toothbrush, a hairbrush, and sent everything to the lab. Within days, results came back. The blood in the van was Ashley's. The spatter patterns suggested something far worse, that she had suffered repetitive force while still alive. Attention then shifted to the Sonata. With Edward's mother's cooperation, investigators located it in North Charleston and seized it for processing. No obvious blood was found, but the suspicious shoe print on the car's panel was preserved. Step by step, Edward's carefully spun story was unraveling. Digital forensics made the noose even tighter. Cell phone records showed Edward's device pinging towers far from his normal routes. On the 4th of April, between 6:44 a.m. and 7:12 a.m. His phone was in Harleyville. Hours later, pings placed him back near work. What was he doing there? Search efforts widened. Authorities scoured reservoirs near Edward's apartment complex, even calling in the Department of Natural Resources to help scan the alligator-infested waters by boat and air. But no trace of Ashley surfaced. Still, investigators knew the case was building. By mid-April, the evidence was overwhelming: blood in the van, phone pings pointing to suspicious travel, witnesses contradicting Edward's story, and his lies about even the simplest details. On the 15th of April, 2015, detectives decided enough was enough. They moved to arrest Edward Bonilla for obstruction of justice, citing his repeated deceptions. When officers arrived at his apartment complex, the scene only deepened their suspicions. Edward was dragging a suitcase toward a rental SUV, seemingly preparing to vanish. The timing was telling. He was taken into custody without resistance. What began as a missing persons case was now a homicide investigation, with Edward squarely in the spotlight. To understand Edward Bonilla, investigators dug into his background. Born and raised in Dorchester County, he attended local schools, where classmates remembered him as someone who blended in with the crowd. He had a brother, Anthony, and the family often gathered for casual get-togethers, like the bonfire Ashley attended that night. Outwardly, Edward seemed ordinary, with a steady job and a long-term girlfriend, but text records revealed another side. While making plans with his partner about dinner and intimacy, he was also messaging Ashley. It painted the picture of a man leading a double life, showing little concern for loyalty or honesty. Professionally, Edward had worked at Cobble Flooring for 8 months, installing flooring and driving company vans. His criminal record was minimal. No serious charges that might have raised alarms, but people who knew him later described a pattern of disregard toward women. When first questioned after his arrest, Edward stuck to the story he'd told before. He repeated the detail about her supposedly accusing him of stealing her mother's phone and kicking his car in anger. But detectives pressed him about the inconsistencies, particularly the surveillance footage showing no Sonata near the mobile home park. As the weeks passed and evidence like Ashley's blood in the van was presented, his answers grew evasive. Though he never confessed outright during interrogations, the walls were closing in. By early May, the case took a decisive turn. On May 5, 2015, based on the forensic results and the mounting circumstantial evidence, Edward Bonilla's charges were upgraded to murder. Investigators didn't believe the crime was premeditated. Instead, they theorized it stemmed from a confrontation that escalated into violence. His pattern of disrespect toward women, combined with Ashley's resistance that night, suggested the encounter spiraled out of control. Just 3 days later, on May 8, 2015, during a private consultation with his attorney, Edward finally broke. He revealed the location of Ashley's body, a remote, wooded tract off Brown Road near Harleyville, the same area where his phone had pinged weeks earlier. Authorities launched a search immediately. On May 9, 2015, search teams, including volunteers and dogs, scoured the site. Deep in the woods, far from any main road, they discovered Ashley's remains. She had been there for more than 5 weeks, lying face down in the mud. Her body was naked except for a red bra, partly wrapped around her neck. Nearby lay a black garment. Her eyeglasses, later matched to family photos, confirmed her identity. Black electrical tape was still looped around her right wrist and neck. Clear evidence of restraint. The autopsy ruled her death a homicide by violence. Discolorations on her scalp were consistent with repeated blunt force trauma. Even after the discovery, Edward's story shifted only slightly. He suggested that restraint during the altercation had gone wrong, but he stopped short of taking full responsibility. By then, however, the evidence spoke louder than his words. The investigation had moved into its next phase, preparing for trial. The trial began on August 8, 2016, in Dorchester County and lasted 4 days. The prosecution argued that Edward intentionally killed Ashley, presenting a timeline of lies and physical proof. They showed gas station surveillance footage of Ashley appearing sober, which contradicted Edward's claim that she was extremely drunk. Phone records and cell tower data showed Edward was in remote locations like Harleyville soon after Ashley disappeared. Near where her body was eventually discovered, experts testified that bloodstains on Edward's work truck showed repeated blunt force trauma, consistent with autopsy results. The prosecution also pointed out that Ashley had a muscle relaxant called cyclohexanone in her system, which she had no reason to take, suggesting she was drugged without her knowledge. Furthermore, the prosecution emphasized that Edward's story changed multiple times, including where he claimed to have left Ashley. They also highlighted his lies about his job and his attempt to escape before being arrested. The prosecution concluded that his actions were not accidental, but a deliberate cover-up of a crime. The defense argued that Ashley's death was a tragic accident caused by a misunderstanding. Edward testified that Ashley became angry after they stopped at a gas station, accusing him of stealing and getting out of the car. He said he accidentally ran her over while backing up. Then, to stop her from attacking him, he held her in what he described as a bear hug, possibly a chokehold. He didn't realize she had stopped breathing until it was too late. Edward admitted he panicked. He put Ashley in the trunk of the Sonata temporarily, then left her on a frontage road. Later, he used his work van to move her body and bury her in a shallow grave. Using a board as a shovel, the defense pointed out that Edward had no serious criminal record. They suggested that the blood evidence was consistent with an accidental struggle, not a deliberate murder. They asked the jury to consider lesser charges, such as involuntary manslaughter, arguing that it was a brief loss of control without any intention to kill Ashley. After deliberating, a jury found Edward Bonilla guilty of murder on August 11, 2016. The judge described the handling and disposal of the body as particularly cruel and sentenced Edward to life in prison without parole. He appealed the conviction in 2019, arguing issues with evidence, admission, and trial conduct, but the South Carolina Court of Appeals upheld the decision, affirming the life sentence. On May 24, 2013, Fabiana Luzzi, a 16-year-old girl from the small town of Corigliano Calabro, Italy, suddenly disappeared, leaving her family in shock and fear. A few days later, the police discovered her body in a remote area, charred and disfigured beyond recognition. The autopsy revealed a truth that shocked the whole of Italy. Fabiana had not only been stabbed more than 20 times, but while still gasping for breath, she had been doused with gasoline and set on fire by her boyfriend, Davide Marone. However, what outraged the public even more was the sentence handed down to the perpetrator of this barbaric crime. Although the act showed signs of being premeditated, Davide was not tried as an adult, but only as a teenager. He received a sentence that was considered too light for the crime that took the life of a young woman, leaving her family with an indelible pain. And since then, a question has haunted Italy. How could a man who stabbed, burned, and murdered a girl receive such a light sentence? How many more lives will be lost before justice is truly on the side of those who died? Fabiana Luzzi grew up in a close-knit family in Corigliano Calabro, Italy. She was energetic, active, and strong-willed, traits that became especially clear in her teenage years. She didn't like being bossed around by her parents and started thinking about moving out. This tension led to frequent conflicts, and by 16, Fabiana decided to live on her own. She rented an apartment not far from her family and took a part-time job to support herself. At first, her income wasn't enough, so her parents helped financially. Despite the conflicts at home, Fabiana was a good student. Her parents had high hopes for her. By 2013, she was a 16-year-old high school student who loved dancing and was taking accounting courses, planning a future in that field. She was also in an on and off relationship after she moved out. Her relationship with her parents improved. With fewer daily arguments, things seemed to stabilize, and Fabiana appeared to be managing adult life well. May 24, 2013 began like any other day. No one expected what was to come. Early that morning, Fabiana left for school. She stayed in touch with her parents by phone, as she usually did, to reassure her mother. She planned to stop by her parents' house after lunch. They were expecting her that evening to continue preparing for their summer vacation. But Fabiana never arrived. Her parents, Mario, Luzzi, and Rosa, became worried when she didn't answer her phone. At first, they didn't panic. They went to her apartment, but no one answered the door. Despite persistent knocking, the landlord provided a spare key, and they found the place empty. With Fabiana still not responding, they headed to her school to see if she had stayed late. On the way, they ran into Fabiana's classmate and friend. The girls said Fabiana had left right after classes, and they hadn't seen her since. Alarmed, her parents reported her missing to the police. Initially, both the family and the police suspected she might have run away. She had done so about a year earlier, before her parents allowed her to live independently. In early spring 2012, she had gone to Bologna after long-standing conflicts at home. Back then, the police quickly found her. Friends said she was staying with acquaintances, and although they did not know her exact address, she kept in touch with her family, which made the situation easier to resolve. This time, Rosa tried to believe it was another runaway, but two things didn't add up. First, unlike the previous time, Fabiana hadn't contacted anyone, and her phone was switched off. Second, she had no reason to run away. She already lived on her own and was satisfied with her life. The Carabinieri began questioning Fabiana's friends and acquaintances. She had a wide social circle, many of whom her parents had already called. No one knew where she was. However, useful leads emerged. The police went to her school to speak with classmates and teachers who might have noticed something unusual. Friends said Fabiana was anxious that day because she planned to meet her boyfriend. A classmate saw 17-year-old David Moroni meet her near the school after classes. He arrived on his scooter, which he often used to pick her up. After that meeting, no one saw Fabiana again. This meant her boyfriend was the last known person to have contact with her. According to her friends, an argument began as soon as he arrived. Davide accused her of infidelity, which she denied. As the search continued, no solid leads emerged. Police wanted to question Davide, but he didn't answer his phone and wasn't at home. His parents said he had left for school early that morning and hadn't returned. While trying to find him, the detectives gathered information about his troubled relationship with Fabian. Fabiana's friends consistently described a jealous relationship on both sides. They also said Davide had been unfaithful. Fabiana had told them she once caught him kissing another girl, which led to a breakup. After that, they made up. Police interviewed everyone they could, but couldn't immediately reach Davide. He was also a high school senior, 17 years old, in 2013. Fabiana's family and friends said that after the breakup, Davide repeatedly tried to see her and even came to her home. Refusing to accept her refusal, David remained missing for almost a day. Then he turned up at a hospital with severe burns on his face and hands, serious enough to require treatment. His condition drew police attention because the injuries looked like they came from handling flammable substances. When asked how he was burned, he refused to cooperate. Under pressure, he eventually claimed he had been attacked by strangers on the street. He did have injuries on his hands that could be defensive, but they looked more like wounds sustained while someone else was fighting for their life. The source of the burns remained suspicious. Since Davide wouldn't fully explain them, police did not believe his story. He also flatly denied any involvement in Fabiana's disappearance and insisted they hadn't met that day. Even though multiple witnesses confirmed they had, detectives saw many inconsistencies in his account and concluded he was lying. Still, suspicion alone wasn't enough. They needed concrete evidence about what happened to Fabiana. They held off on releasing Davide, and under continued questioning, he began to change his story. First, he admitted he had picked her up after school. Then he claimed he dropped her off at a friend's house and never saw her again. That was quickly disproven. No one in her circle had seen her after classes. Confronted with this lie, Davide changed his account again. He now admitted he picked Fabiana up on his scooter and that they argued near the school. He accused her of seeing someone else. According to him, the argument continued as they rode away. Fabiana sits behind him, denying infidelity and refuting his accusations. They didn't get far. A few kilometers from the school, he stopped in a secluded area. The argument escalated. They shouted until he lost his temper and announced their relationship was over. He said he then jumped on the scooter and drove away, claiming he had no idea what happened to her. After that, the detectives learned from Davide where everything had happened. 2 officers checked the location but found nothing suspicious. Meanwhile, they spoke with Fabiana's relatives, who all said Davide would never let her go. They described him as obsessive and manipulative, someone who stalked her after she tried several times, unsuccessfully, to end the relationship. This supported the Carabinieri's concerns about Davide's behavior, but they needed stronger evidence. On May 25, 2013, a call came into the local station from a man living a few kilometers from the school. While working in a citrus grove, he found signs of a fire and pieces of what looked like women's clothing. It seemed minor at first, but the police had a detailed description of what Fabiana wore the day she disappeared. The burnt fabric matched. The situation grew more serious. Still, there was no body. Investigators avoided premature conclusions and questioned Davide again. He continued to deny everything, insisting he knew nothing. Notably, the location of the fire was near the area he had previously directed police to, suggesting he may have been trying to distract them. Another day passed. Davide spoke with detectives in the presence of a prosecutor and his lawyer. He began to crack. His story had changed several times, and now he said he would tell the truth. He admitted they had a fight that escalated. He claimed Fabiana attacked him and things spiraled out of control. When he stopped, it was too late. He said he started a large fire to destroy evidence and told the police where to find Fabiana's body. The body was found not far from the site of the fire. Fabiana was dead, and her body was badly burned, requiring testing to fully identify her. All materials were sent for examination. She was identified through dental records as 16 years old, Fabiana Luzzi. Her family was devastated. She died just weeks before her next birthday. Davide said Fabiana attacked first, and he lost control. He claimed he carried a knife for everyday tasks and used it to stab her. Although he called it self-defense, the more than 20 stab wounds on Fabiana's body could not support this claim, especially since David only suffered minor injuries. Interrogations continued. Despite his lies, Davide was the only source for details about Fabiana's death, and investigators pressed on. He then said Fabiana fell to the ground and stopped moving, and that he set the body on fire to hide the crime. That was false. Forensic analysis showed Fabiana was alive when she was set on fire. Her lungs were full of smoke. She burned alive. The Carabinieri suspected Davide was still minimizing his guilt. Eventually, Davide admitted Fabiana was alive when he doused her with gasoline and lit the fire. He saw her breathing and trying to get up, and he stopped her. According to the forensic expert, although she suffered more than 20 stab wounds, none struck vital organs or major arteries, she could have died from blood loss, but only after a long time, and she might have survived with timely medical help. That was not what David intended. These findings supported the conclusion that the crime was premeditated. Numerous witnesses had described ongoing tension between Fabiana and Davide. Shortly before Fabiana's death, their relationship had reached one of its most turbulent phases. Her best friend said that she had broken up with David and was trying to get her life together. She likely had started seeing someone else. For a haunted young man like David, this could have been a powerful motivation to commit a crime. Detectives were struck by how cold-blooded Davide seemed. He appeared emotionless and kept resisting, forcing investigators to extract every word. It took the Carabinieri 2 days of questioning to get the most plausible account. According to Davide, he met Fabiana that day after she finished her classes. He wanted to talk about their relationship again, but she insisted it was over. David refused to accept her decision, believing she simply wanted more attention from him. He chased after her and tried to court her, but he was wrong. She was firm and did not want to reconcile. In the heat of the argument, Fabiana said she already had a new boyfriend and would not get back together. That comment sealed her fate. In a jaloux rage, Davide grabbed a knife and stabbed her more than 20 times. It happened in a deserted area on the outskirts of the city. There was no one to intervene, and he did not stop. Even after Fabiana fell to the ground bleeding, she was still alive. Davide still did not call for help. Instead, he went to his scooter, took a small gasoline canister, and poured it over her while she was still alive. He then set her on fire. Fabiana continued to struggle, but she could no longer save herself. The heartbreaking case drew intense public and media attention. Fabiana's family could not accept that their daughter's life ended so tragically. Everyone remembered Fabiana as a cheerful, active girl who had recently been seeking freedom and independence, perhaps a factor that contributed to her death. After moving out and living independently, she rarely shared her relationship with her parents, mainly confiding in her friends. As a result, her parents could not fully grasp the danger. Fabiana's close friends described her relationship with David as unhealthy. She quickly became disillusioned with him. He was obsessive, extremely jealous, and often provoked conflicts, sometimes just because a boy on the street said hello to her. The situation was difficult to control, especially since she was still in school. Relatives heard about the breakup but did not realize he was acting like a stalker, and that the two had resumed seeing each other. Tensions escalated. During the breakup, Fabiana complained to friends about him and wanted to report him to the police, hoping that would stop him from haunting her further. His behavior was frightening. For reasons unclear, his parents did not seem concerned about their son's condition. Many witnesses described Davide as aggressive, antisocial, and strange. He struggled to make new friends and showed signs of cruelty, which his family appeared to dismiss with a peculiar indifference. He had long been a troubled young man with possessive tendencies. An ex-girlfriend had warned others about him. She needed help from adults to scare him off, and only then did he leave her alone. Fabiana, however, wanted to handle the situation herself. Davide also had a difficult personal history and behavioral problems from an early age. These issues worsened amid domestic violence after his parents divorced. His first stepfather was an alcoholic who drank daily and often started fights, beating Davide and his mother. Although they separated from him quickly, the damage was done. Perhaps this contributed to Davide's cruelty. He could not let Fabiana go when she tried to free herself from his control. Based on this, detectives believe David was still hiding the full truth. The circumstances suggested He had lured her to the deserted area with the intention to kill. The gasoline canister strongly indicated premeditation. Davide did not typically carry extra fuel. He rarely rode his scooter outside the city, and its fuel efficiency meant a full tank was usually sufficient. Most disturbing was the brutality he inflicted on Fabiana, a fragile young woman. Her friends were convinced she would never have willingly followed her boyfriend to such an isolated place. She would have sensed immediately that something was wrong. Fabiana's funeral was held on May 28, 2013, at the town hall, where about 5,000 people gathered to pay their respects. Local TV channels and newspapers closely covered the event. The tragedy reignited public debate about femicide and the vulnerability of girls in relationships with manipulative partners. During the ceremony, Fabiana's family and friends spoke, as did the leader of her religious community. They offered support to the family and expressed hope that the perpetrator would be punished to the fullest extent of the law. Many people once again asked how to prevent the recurring violence that claims young lives. Meanwhile, Davide Moroni was arrested. He confessed and is awaiting trial in prison. Fabiana's relatives demanded he be tried as an adult, citing the crime's cruelty, planning, and attempts to conceal evidence. Although prosecutors advocated trying David as an adult, the judge ruled that he would be tried as a juvenile. His mental health became a point of contention. Witnesses, including his ex-girlfriend, described troubling behavior, prompting evaluations. However, experts found no condition that would justify legal limitations on responsibility. Declared mentally competent, Davide stood trial. Because he confessed, the proceedings were expedited. Fabiana's family attended every stage, determined to see justice served. He was found guilty and initially sentenced to 22 years in prison. Davide appealed, arguing procedural errors in the mental health evaluation and seeking a reduced sentence. An independent expert hired by the defense later concluded he was only partially competent. As a result, the appeals court reduced his sentence to 18 years and removed premeditation as an aggravating factor, allowing further appeals to proceed. There remained a risk his sentence could be reduced even more. Since Davide was a minor at the time of the crime, Fabiana's family could not join the criminal case as a civil party, but they continued to push for a harsher outcome, believing the sentence was too lenient. In 2015, the court ordered Davide's parents to pay €300,000 in compensation to Fabiana's family. The defense disputed this, but the family's lawyer argued that Davide's parents shared responsibility for his upbringing. The court agreed, finding that they failed to provide adequate supervision, including medical care and access to full education. The judge noted they did not monitor him sufficiently and missed the period when his mental health issues began. No records showed psychiatric consultations or appropriate treatment for David. A lack of care that the court concluded contributed to the tragedy. Mario Luzzi, Fabiana's father, expressed strong indignation towards the Ministry of Justice and even appealed directly to the president. His anger stemmed from the fact that Davide Moroni received concessions while in prison. Davide reportedly behaved well, avoided conflicts, and actively participated in a rehabilitation program. Because of this, he was periodically allowed temporary release. Fabiana's family condemned the decision as absurd, arguing that the laws protect perpetrators rather than victims. Mario wrote extensively about the pain of losing his daughter, saying that such leniency toward her killer only deepens their suffering. Fabiana's family has kept her memory alive. Since 2013, they have held a vigil every May 24 and organized awareness campaigns to share her story. Aligning these efforts with initiatives against gender-based violence, their work has drawn attention from organizations addressing similar issues at broader levels. In 2025, for the 12th anniversary of Fabiana's death, the Anti-Violence Center hosted the commemoration. The organization offers legal and psychological support to women in abusive or dangerous relationships. The events took place in a municipal suburban park in a square dedicated to Fabiana Luzzi, which has become a symbolic site. Despite these efforts, the family believes that the legislation remains excessively lenient.